Don't have a video of you all yet.
Can you see us, Tim?
I can see the ceiling. I don't think you have the camera pointed in the right direction. That's better.
Okay. Thanks, Sophie. All good, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I forgot. Really did. They learn a new language.
Yeah, exactly. Latin, I took Latin.
You guys good? Yes. All right. Let's call to order the Falls Church Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, August 7, 2024. Mr. Trainer, will you call a roll, please?
Yep. Mr. Duncan?
Here?
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Ms. Calmont?
Here.
Mr. Hyra?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum, and we have one member who wishes to participate remotely. Mr. Stevens, you identify your location and the reason for your participation by electronic means.
Yes, I am in Maine on personal business. Happy to join you all.
Thank you for joining on your personal business trip. We need a motion to allow Mr. Stevens to participate.
I can do it. I move that the Planning Commission approve electronic participation by Mr. Stevens in this meeting for his personal trip pursuant to the Planning Commission's policy for remote participation in Planning Commission meetings as adopted on March 15th, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Duncan. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Ms. Calmont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Okay, we don't have anything for our speaker. I'm sorry. Let's adopt the agenda first. Before we get into that, we do have we had two action items, one for the commercial building parking relief public hearing because of a snafu with the notification about the hearing. We are not going to be able to take action on that item tonight, but because it was advertised, we are going to receive public comments, but the commission will not take any action tonight. So with that one change to the agenda, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the meeting agenda as revised.
Second?
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody. Okay. Number 5, receipt of petitions. Mr. Tran, do we have any written correspondence?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we had John Fritsch write into the commission regarding the Greening of Lincoln initiative. We also had several written comments come in earlier this week that the public and the commission was notified about from accessory dwellings, commercial parking, and the bike plan, master plan update.
Any questions on those from anybody? Do we have any in-person petitions? Is there anyone here who wishes to speak on any items on the agenda? We have 2 work session items, so we're not taking comments on the bike plan update, right, and on the accessory dwellings update, or we do that now? We can.
Now would be a good time to
Okay.
take those if there are any.
Okay. Anybody here for public comments?
That's right. Mr. Chair, we have Gene Gresco here to speak about accessory dwellings.
Yes, I'm Gene Gresco, and I live on North Fairfax Street. I went to the recent conversations on accessory dwellings and appreciate those presentations. I'm glad that approximately 36 people showed up at each meeting, including some members of the commission. I hope that other citizens will come here to speak on ADs or at least send in their comments. I'd like to highlight to this commission one of my recent email submissions included in today's agenda. In it, I worked up a chart using recent demographic data to show how our housing pipeline has grown recently. That growth includes condos, senior housing, proposed townhouses, but most dramatically, rental units. Those apartments range from studios to 3 bedrooms. Needless to say, a lot of housing options. My pipeline chart further shows how our completed plus in-process housing is getting very close to reaching the 2040 housing unit goal expressed in the recent demographic chapter of our plan. And I'm sure developers are looking at other potential commercial sites to surpass this small remaining gap. I hope this commission considers that impressive accomplishment and questions if AD rentals are really needed now in residential neighborhoods. With all those apartments on Broad and Washington Streets, I don't think changing the character of our single-family residential neighborhoods is warranted. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else here wants
The other,
note to speak?
we've got 2 registered speakers for the parking.
Okay. And we can, since we're not taking action on that, can we take those, should we take those now, or?
Yeah, I think typically by procedure, we would allow speakers to either sign now or wait until the item is called.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take those now then. So if you
And it's
want,
about to be called.
pardon?
And it's about to be called.
Right.
All right, so we have Joseph Sharizi.
Hello, Commission. Thank you for the chance to speak, even though you're not taking action tonight. I appreciate it. My name is Joseph Sharizi. I'm the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Council. My comments tonight are just for myself and do not represent the group or anyone else. I just wanted to come and publicly speak extremely in favor of the Planning Commission supporting the largest reduction in the commercial parking requirements possible. I know city staff has, suggested 1,000 square feet as a freebie to businesses. I think that's completely arbitrary number. And if we want to help small businesses more, we should do more. This is really a chance that we get to decide how much do we want to help new small businesses open in Falls Church. A little bit, 500 feet, 500 square feet, a bit, 1,000 square feet, a lot of it, 2,000 square feet. I don't think there should really be a limit. A lot of something that I learned while looking through the parking requirements as this came up for commercial businesses is, you need to have one parking spot per 125 square feet for a nursery or daycare. But in my experience, 5-year-olds at nurseries don't drive cars. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but I think it seems a little silly to, say the size of the daycare, should have this many parking spaces all day unused by toddlers who don't drive, and aren't leaving their cars at daycares. The number one reason women have left the workforce since 2020 is because of the cost of childcare going up in this country, and there are so many downstream societal problems that I think are being caused by making it harder for people to open small businesses, harder to open more childcare centers, more expensive to do so. And, there's going to be people as this, discussion and a greater discussion around updating parking minimums comes up. There's going to be people that say, okay, what are the second-term consequences of getting rid of these parking mandates? But really, I think we need to think long and hard. What are the consequences of leaving it the way it is? And who's being harmed right now? I'm also a collector of arcade machines. I have 2 Killer Queen arcade machines, like a pinball machine. There's also a parking requirement for if you add pinball machines to a restaurant or to an arcade venue in Falls Church. And you need 1 parking space per arcade machine. So I can't go to any local business and say, hey, take my pinball machines and, let's have more revenue for that small business. I can't do that because they would need to put in more parking, which is, obviously absurd, not based on any science. And yeah, just, please support the maximum amount. It can really help a lot of people, help a lot of businesses, and improve our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last registered speaker is Alexander Maricola.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Alex. I live on Chanel Terrace. I'm also going to talk about minimum parking. It's bad. I think there's a lot of reasons it's bad, many of which you guys have probably already looked at. But I thought I would highlight my biggest gripe with it, and that being that there is no academic research in support of minimum parking. Local government tends to take a lot of studies in mind when it takes any action, an infuriating amount even. But that wasn't the case when these parking minimums were adopted, and no study has been done since in support of these parking minimums. I can't even find a study, not just from Falls Church, but the United States, where they found that parking minimums were beneficial. They cause more traffic because they incentivize car use, and they stop businesses from being able to build up in Falls Church. This is catastrophic, to say the least, for local development. And I really, really hope that everyone can see that calls for more studies to find support for getting rid of this is kind of an insane request when there were never any studies to support it being created. Why all of a sudden are we calling for studies now when these were implemented in the 1960s? There was never any call. I have done my best to see if anybody had any academic background in urban planning when these were initially adopted. I can't find any. Even if they did, it would be horribly outdated given it's been more than half a century since all of these regulations were created. So we just urge the committee to please, 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 please get rid of these or at the very least reform them heavily or look into doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other speaker slips?
That's all of the speaker slips I have. Mr.
Anyone
Chair.
else here who wishes to speak to the commission this evening for other items? Okay. All right, let's move on to our action items, 6A, which is the commercial building parking relief public hearing, which, as I mentioned, we are going to defer action given the challenges we had with the notification of the vote tonight. So, Mr. Stoddard?
Yep. And just to clarify, I think, so there was a recent change, there was a change last July 1 that the state set in place for advertising requirements and around zoning changes, and I thought that was a good change about clarifying the timeline for advertisement, and then they changed it again this July 1, which is an equally good change. We just weren't, we didn't catch the key change quickly enough. For anyone interested in the nuances, it's a 7-day advertising requirement that the second ad has to post at least 7 days ahead of the public hearing. And because you all meet on a Wednesday and the news press goes on a Thursday, you can't count both the day it posts and the day you hold the hearing, so we missed by one. It's a classic computer science challenge. And so the end result is we'll actually be going back to the operating stance we used to be in, which is instead of running 2 ads, we'll run 3. The ads 3 weeks and 2 weeks out are what are legally required. I think that the ad immediately before is just good transparency for local government. So moving forward, we'll be back to where we were 4 or 5 years ago, running 3 ads for each item. So not a bad thing at all, just something we got to adjust. So the schedule we worked out with the clerk's office, the attorney's office, the manager's office, and they confirmed it with council 2 nights ago. We'll defer the planning commission's action until your first meeting in September, which is September 4th. And the council has indicated that they will defer so that they can wait to hear your recommendation. They'll defer until September 9th, which is obviously their first meeting after yours. So that'll be the revised schedule going forward.
So do we have a presentation from staff?
Yeah, I can hit the Well, actually, maybe I'll let Mr. Trainer handle this one. So I'll set it up briefly. This was going to be before you for action tonight, but now I think what staff recommends is you all use it as a work session. I know we had a small group for the last work session. We've got a sort of slightly larger group for this work session. So I think there is value in talking through what's happened. Other groups have weighed in. You've heard from speakers tonight. Staff has been doing some additional work, and we have some revised materials. Mr. Trainer has been our staff planner on this one, so I'll turn it over to him to give you all an update on what's happened since your last work session and the status of the current proposal that's before the commission and the council.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Formally, good evening, Commission. Tonight, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a work session on a proposal to amend the zoning ordinance to allow for the first 1,000 square feet of space in existing commercial buildings to be exempt from off-street parking requirements, provided that they meet very specific criteria. Is that a little too loud? The Planning Commission last held a work session on this item on June 5th, 2024, and so I'll just run through some of the updates that have happened since then. The first kind of major one is that an additional criteria has been added to the eligibility for the proposal, which is that the commercial building has to not exceed 20,000 gross square feet in floor area. And our kind of methodology, staff's methodology about how that was arrived at is beginning on line 20 through 33. We looked at, taking the feedback that we got from council at their last work session about a recommendation for a limit on the size of the commercial buildings, in addition to the criteria that was already in the proposal. Staff went back and looked at the size of all the eligible commercial buildings that were subject to the proposal in its last form. And so we put the size of those eligible commercial buildings into quartiles, similarly to what we did with the commercial COs previously. That box is on line 33. And so that 20,000 square feet exempts the largest, about 20%, I think, of previously eligible buildings. Those are mostly your larger multi-level commercial buildings that potentially could have multiple tenants that could all potentially have eligibility for parking exemptions. There was concern that you might end up with again, a large commercial building with effectively no parking requirements. And so staff went back and looked at adding a cap to the size of the commercial building that would add to the eligibility criteria for the proposal, and where we landed at was 20,000 feet. Let's see, the Economic Development Authority made their recommendation for an exemption area of the first 1,200 square feet at their meeting on June 4th. I believe that was covered the last work session. But following the Planning Commission's last work session again, which was June 5th, the Chamber of Commerce also held a work session on the proposal on June 6th and also decided to recommend exempting the first 1,200 square feet of commercial use area. Both of those written recommendations are included as attachments to the proposal. The CICT also held a work session on the proposal on June 12th. There was a really good discussion. The CICT didn't make a formal recommendation, so there was no attachment from that meeting. Nor was there an attachment from the Environmental Sustainability Council, but during that meeting, the ESC did vote to recommend that the first 1,500 square feet be exempt from parking regulation calculations. Beginning on line 61 is a comment and response box, kind of collecting all of the comments, requests, and questions that staff received from the Planning Commission and City Council. Those questions and the kind of criteria are all grouped by theme. And then staff's response is also included in the right column. I won't go through all of these in detail, but if there's a theme or a question in particular that commissioners want to return to, I'm happy to. So let me move further down into current parking utilization, beginning on line 103. Staff included in the staff report a couple more kind of key details from the Walker Consultants parking study that was done, kind of illuminating further the observed parking utilization of those public parking garages during the peak hour and following the peak hour. Those counts are included in this table 2 on line 109. And then also Walker included a kind of seasonal adjustment because the parking counts were taken, I believe, during the winter time. And so noting that retail and commercial activity tends to tick up in the warmer seasons, that adjustment has been included in this chart on line 115. And so, again, moving into the recommended amendment, the only change to the recommendation, again, is that the building changing use, the commercial building changing use, does not exceed 20,000 square feet in gross floor area. As a reminder of the other existing criteria for eligibility, the building changing use does not have a recorded site plan with an approved transportation demand management plan or parking management plan, and the new use space is not within a shopping center, and the new uses off-street parking requirements are calculated using square feet as listed in Table 3. I see here that we actually, there's one more change that is in the code, the draft code, but in addition to the building changing use not having an approved transportation demand management plan or parking management plan, staff's also added the criteria of not having an off-site parking plan. So in addition to not having a TDM plan or a parking management plan, another added criteria is that there's no off-site shared parking agreement as well, so that there's not already, it's kind of adding on to the idea that the building doesn't already have a parking reduction. So apologies for not pointing that out earlier. So in the staff analysis section, you may recall last time we had several examples showing how the proposal would function. We've left the 1,000 square feet exemption area, showing how certain uses might be unlocked through this commercial area reduction. We've also included a new column comparing the reduction area of the 1,000 square feet with how many uses might be unlocked with a 1,200 square feet, following the recommendation of the Chamber of Commerce and the EDA. And I'm just going to keep going. We can return to these if there's certain questions about either of those examples. And then in staff findings, we've this section beginning on line 232 talks a little bit about some of the maps that are attached, as was requested by the Planning Commission and City Council in their work session, showing the spatial locations of eligible commercial buildings versus non-eligible buildings. We've updated those maps with the added eligibility criteria, particularly the 20,000 square foot cap. And so in let's see, in attachment 1E, existing parking conditions, we show the, let me just pull it up, eligible commercial buildings versus non-eligible commercial buildings, and those are broken down based on their non-eligibility. So this kind of lighter orange shows over 20,000 square feet. This gray shows shopping center, and then the dark gray shows TDM or PMP. And then we've identified the 3 public parking garages here. We have Broad in Washington, which is just come online with 64 parking spaces, the George Mason Square garage, and then the, that's Broad in Washington, Kaiser Permanente, and then the George Mason Square. Altogether, this is about 400 plus public parking spaces, and the the purple circles around them show about a quarter mile in diameter around these garages, which captures about 43% of the eligible commercial buildings. And so with that, I'll just wrap up with the timing section. As Mr. Stoddard mentioned earlier, we did have a public hearing scheduled for tonight. That is requested to be deferred to the Planning Commission's September 4th meeting, and then council will then have their final consideration taking place on September 9th. So that, I'll turn back to you, Mr. Chair, for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as mentioned, this is a work session, so I guess we're not even taking action to defer it. We're just going to not take any action tonight. But I do appreciate the staff report and the additions. We've already had a work session on this as a commission a few weeks ago, and I appreciate the updated timeline. So let me just turn it over to commissioners for any questions or comments, any remarks. Ms. Coma.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the decision to stick with the 1,000 square feet. I can see the difference in what the parking that would be required, and it's, for some of these uses, it's somewhat significant. So just curious about that.
Sure. You have a staff's recommendation of the 1,000. That was mostly because that was what council referred out. So for, after kind of consultation with the city attorney, that was just kind of best as left is. That doesn't mean that it can't change, right? The council will still have the ability to go higher than the 1,000 square feet without triggering a first reading. But for kind of advertising and those kind of consistency purposes, staff's recommendation remains at 1,000.
So if we wanted to support a higher square footage as a commission, how would we do that here?
We could.
Assuming we would agree on that. which
We could
may not.
amend the motion to include that.
Okay. Maybe that's something for everybody to consider. I would be in support of that. That's all I have. Thank you for the maps. I mean, it's like a really thorough look at this. This is still like a baby step into changing parking regulations, which I agree are kind of pseudoscience in a lot of ways. So it's nice that we're looking at this, and maybe we can do, it's a little bit of a test case, and I hope we get some new businesses out of it. That would be a terrific result, and reuse of our existing properties.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes, I wasn't here in June when you all had your discussion, so I'm happy to weigh in tonight. I thought you had a very good discussion back in June, so a lot of good points there. I basically very supportive of this initiative. The whole issue of parking minimums has changed on the national level. I think as our two public speakers indicated this evening, there really is no research that indicates or supports the benefits of having minimums. We're not ready to completely eliminate them, so we're in this kind of interim step. And I think staff has made a good proposal here. When it comes to the large development projects, we basically, through the special exception negotiation project, have reduced parking minimums there for those larger projects. However, it's kind of left the small business without that type of remedy on this interim basis. So I think this is a good proposal to kind of fill that gap while staff continues looking at parking overall. One of the things that came out of your discussion in June was the risk possibility, not necessarily knowing what would happen. And I get that. There's always kind of unintended consequences that we have to be concerned about. But I think what strikes me is that there's risk of not going ahead as well. And so you kind of have to weigh those two out. And I think in this case, there's more risk by not going ahead and making some effort to reduce these minimums for small businesses. It's really difficult to open up a small business. And I think this is one thing that we can do to try to make that a little bit easier in our city. So again, I support this. I'm kind of agnostic on the whole issue of 1,200 square feet versus 1,000. I understand it, but it may be more of a political decision if City Council feels like there's a better chance of getting this interim measure passed by keeping it with 1,000 square feet. Then I would support that. At the same time, I won't oppose if my colleagues wish to go with a higher number. I probably support that as well. So thanks, Mr. Chair. Those are my thoughts.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Well said by Commissioners Comont and Stevens. I find myself in substantial agreement with their views as to the desirability of trying this out. I'd like to thank staff for continuing to layer information and some alterations onto this. I think the 1,000 square foot number came up way back when, sometime in the late spring, when we thought this was going to be a quick and easy, project that we could pass without a whole lot of controversy and discussion. And it's taken a little longer. I guess I would like to see us, given the time that we've invested in it, go to the larger than 1,000 square feet number, just to make everybody's effort worthwhile. It does seem to have both belt and suspenders on it now to prevent unintended or to minimize the risk of unintended consequences, since we have the 1,000 or 1,200 square foot number as well as the 20,000 square foot parameter around, where these would be allowed. So I think I'm in favor of what you're presenting here, with the idea that we would encourage the council, perhaps after we stew on it a little bit longer during the August recess, come back in September, if we could sort of get our muscle behind the 1,200, 1,250 square foot number. I think that'd be desirable from my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hyra.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. Definitely not a parking expert. But what I would say is, there's been a lot of talk about how many studies and what studies have said. There's been a lot of studies on parking. We may not agree with those studies, but there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of studies looking at parking requirements and what it does to businesses, what it does to traffic patterns, what it does to carbon emissions. And I think that we are likely going to change the parking requirements, but what would be nice, if we talked a lot about unintended consequences. We don't know what the consequences of this policy change is going to be. Nobody knows. We hypothesize, we think it'll stimulate small business development. We think it'll reduce traffic. We think it will reduce carbon emissions in our city. Why don't we try to study that, so that if this is a pilot and it is successful, we can document our successes and tell the other municipalities around the DMV and around the country what we have done, And then we can hopefully get other municipalities to replicate what we've done. But to just think that, oh, if we do this, we'll get that. Well, we just stop it with that. There's political will to do it, study it, know what the consequences are, and tell the story. So I just hope that we think about this policy. We try to come up with a way to document the effects of the policy, the intended, hypothesized effects, and also try to figure out what unintended consequences there were so that we can tell our story, because we are innovating, and we innovate on a lot of different things, but then we don't document it. We just do it because we have a gut feeling that we should do it, but we don't know exactly what we're doing or the outcomes of it. So that's all. Just please, I know we have limited capacity in our city with staff. Sometimes we can't document everything, but here is something that we could potentially do that could do a lot of good. But if we don't document it, we can't tell the story. So that's my only comment with this. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'll say from my perspective, I am strongly in support of this as well. We don't have too many levers for supporting small businesses, so I think this is a good thing to try. I think that does make a compelling case for how we can make it easier for small businesses to stay and come into the city. And there is a lot of work on this around the country, as the speakers and other folks have mentioned. And I think Falls Church is actually becoming an outlier in this, just given all of the parking reform that's out there right now. So there's a lot that's being done, and there's a lot that's being studied. So, I'd like to see us catch up. I haven't heard that many good reasons for not doing this. I know there's potentially unintended consequences and spillover effects, things like that. But I think we also have the mechanisms in place for dealing with a lot of that stuff now. So, and there is a lot of literature for this. I'm glad you mentioned pseudoscience. I think that's what Don Shoup called it. Don Shoup, the father of parking reform, that a lot of us have studied under too. So, I think this is great. I'd like to see it go as far as it possibly can. I don't know the mechanism for us to talk about whether we want to go with 1,000, 1,200, or 1,500, whatever the right number is. It feels abstract to me, these numbers, but I would support going as high as we possibly can with this, because I think we don't get too many bites at the apple. So those are my comments. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add before we move on.
In furtherance of that, what's the process if the sense of the majority of commission would be to move from 1,000 to a number higher than 1,000? Can we express the sense of that just in terms of what you would prepare for our September meeting? Or is it best just to leave this the way it is and make an amendment at the September meeting? My recollection of what the city attorney said when asked about this now a couple of months ago at least was that the difference between 1,000 and 1,200 was not, any kind of roadblock in having to do a first reading or anything like that. So I don't want to do anything to delay it. On the other hand, I do want to, as I said earlier, get, as much bang as we can for the buck that we've spent to prepare this pretty extensive document and make these belt and suspender modifications that aim to minimize risk. What's the sense of staff or other commissioners on going forward in our September meeting with the standing idea that we're going to do 1,200 and encourage council to consider that?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a conversation about a specific number tonight, and maybe to help guide that conversation, if I might ask Mr. Trainer, if you can go to the table on line 221, I'll put that while that's sort of pulling up on the screen. If you all want to talk about a different number tonight, what we can do is take that number back. Obviously, we can, when we produce the new staff report, we can put that number in your recommended motion. But what we would also do is run that number internally, especially with the city attorney's office, to make sure that delta, that change is within the scope of what council referred out at first reading. And just as a reminder on process, right, ordinances are big deals, right? They're local laws that change people's lives. And so the setup behind this is the council has a first reading and put the community on notice that they're formally considering this. And then second reading is, it can be a final action of something that's close to that. And so what we would do, if you all have a specific number in mind, we could take that back to the city attorney and affirm then when you all take action that yes, that number works, or no, that number doesn't work, and here's an acceptable alternative. So if you all have a number, it would be helpful to have
Okay,
that.
thank you. That's responsive to my question. Again, my personal position would be, I think it's a good idea to give the community advance notice. We have the advantage of the advertising snafu is that we now have another almost month to circulate the idea. I do think it would be fairer to, if a majority of us feel that 1,200 would be appropriate, serve notice that that's what we think that we'd like to vote on in September. And if there's any who substantially object to that, it gives them time to prepare their arguments and come to us in September with, any counter case that they might want to make.
So the reason I asked for this table, so this was an analysis of tenant fit-out spaces. And just a reminder, right, we're not talking about new construction, we're talking about tenant fit-out. So these are existing buildings, and just as a point of background, it is very unusual for a tenant fit-out to include site work. So I know there's been maybe some confusion around that issue, that somehow by changing this, the parking's going away. Typically, when a tenant moves into a building, they're not changing the site. So the parking that's there is the parking that's there. And the reason staff had recommended this as a proposal, because we do hear from small business owners who are about to sign a lease, they want to make sure it's going to work. They check with the zoning office, and we say, oh, I'm sorry, you don't meet the parking minimums, and that ends that new business from forming in the city. Maybe they go somewhere else, or maybe they just don't start a business at all. And so, or maybe they go somewhere that's outside of walking distance, where somewhere you do have to drive your car to. So what we had done is gone back, Mr. Trainer had gone back and pulled historical data on recently opened businesses within the city, and he binned them by square footage, by size. And what you can see is that the smallest 50% of businesses that open up inside the city recently were around 1,360 square feet. And so one of the reasons we had picked 1,000 square feet is because it does remove a substantial amount of parking, especially in that small business category. But certainly you can see from this table that moving that up would certainly help additional businesses, and there may be some breakpoints in there that would be meaningful.
I find this table helpful. I would support 1,200 square feet. I would support 1,500 square feet. 1,000 sort of unlocks new uses in maybe a third of existing buildings. If you go to 1,500, you unlock more uses. More businesses could open in closer to maybe 2/3 of buildings, which to me is a good thing. So I would support a 1,500 number. If I think you'd have to run that by the city lawyer. That's a 50% increase from what was referred to us. So I don't know if that's substantially different or not, but
Yeah, I think you look at it both on percentage as well as absolute, right? So if you right, a 50% increase in the tax rate would be a big deal, but going from maybe 400 square feet to 600 square feet is still 50%, but maybe that 200 isn't really a practical impact. So I think we'd look at it from all angles.
great.
Anything else?
Are there other voices on the 1,500, or I'm sort of taking it, you don't vote on it, but sort of the consensus of the group seems to be that 1,500 is the number to check?
To me, it's compelling just because of this table and for the reason Ms. Coleman mentioned, that it does get us the best bang for the buck, opens up a lot more properties here.
I go with that.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, again, it's not my first choice for political reasons, but I will go along with whichever number we both have consensus around, and through Paul ensuring that our city attorney is comfortable with the number.
And as Mr. Duncan mentioned, we do have the happy accident of this being still a work session, so we can get back to this again.
And I would, just to follow up on Mr. Hyra's suggestion that we kind of take a look back at the impact of this, I think maybe that's something we could add in our whereases, recommendation that staff in, I don't know how many years, 2 years, 3 years, like take a look at, I don't know how you measure the impact of something like this. How many people are availing themselves, I guess, of this new flexibility? How many more businesses might have opened? What kinds of impacts are we seeing, if any? That might be a good thing. That was sort of what you were driving at, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to isolate an impact of a specific policy because so many things are going to impact traffic patterns, small businesses opening or closing. But it would be nice if we do a policy change, we just get descriptive data that says, in the last 5 years, we had X number of businesses, small businesses open. Then we enact the policy and we just start counting to see how they relate to one another. We look at our traffic patterns, our carbon emissions. We have some indicators related to the policy action that we just start to document. But even just documenting it with descriptives is never going to tell you the policy impact, but at least we're just starting to document some things, which would be good to pair if we are going to implement this policy. So.
In this case, though, we can also count how many businesses are actually using this exemption, the reduction. Yeah. So I feel like you're right. There's lots of other kind of larger effects that we might not be able to pinpoint causality for those things, but you can count how many people are using this new flexibility.
Sure.
So I think it's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
And do you have a feeling on the cap size?
I don't have expertise to know whether it's 1,000,
Okay.
1,500, so I would vote in the way that you all feel you want to go.
Please.
Just one more question that I don't think we've touched on, but was mentioned at our previous meeting on this. There was some concern expressed that spillover from inadequate parking for businesses might occur into residential neighborhoods, and what do we do then? There's nothing in this policy that would prevent the normal processes that we go. This is a question, not a statement. Is there anything in this policy that would change our normal posture of responding to community concerns in the event that there was some, significant spillover of traffic from an underparked, if you can call it that, business into a residential neighborhood, either by some sort of hourly restrictions on parking except for residents of that neighborhood, so as to not run into the problem of the employee who comes to work and needs a place to park his or her car for 10 hours. Or, some sort of more blanket parking restrictions as we saw at Winter Hill when we built the Harris Teeter building. There's nothing in here that constrains that sort of process from unfolding and being decided on by council as it so chooses.
That's correct. So talking about studies, other jurisdictions spend entire plan documents talking about what's called curbside management or curb management, and what do you do with that space right adjacent to the curb. It turns out that's some of the most valuable real estate in a city. It could be used for parking. It could be used for a bike lane. It could be used for a bioswale. It could be for freight pickup and drop off. It can be used for a lot of different things. Now, the council has already sort of set the policy on how it expects that curb management to be handled, that there is in city code a provision where people can petition for time-limited parking, and there is a standard for it. So staff goes, so once a block can petition for parking restrictions on a residential street, And once they collect the required percentage of signatures, staff goes out and assesses parking utilization, how much of the parking is actually being used as a percentage. And when it trips over a threshold, then staff does go out and implement parking restrictions. The standard parking restriction near a commercial district is 2-hour parking during the day. And in setting that policy, what council was communicating was that most of this competition is happening during the day. That's when the businesses are open, and 2 hours is the appropriate amount of time because it's not supposed to be employee parking. It's not supposed to be all-day parking. But council was communicating they expect that curb space to be shared. If you're going to come in and shop in the city or go to a restaurant in the city, then absolutely that nearby parking is available for use. And so that is the standard unless there's other sort of prevailing factors, and then the city manager has flexibility to explain what those factors are and implement something different. Most often where we've used that flexibility is around the larger mixed-use buildings where we know there are residential uses, and then the conflict is at night. And so around the more recent mixed-use buildings, we have put in overnight parking restrictions. But the standard, especially around commercial districts, is 2-hour parking during the day, with city permits being exempted.
Okay, thank you. That's responsive to my question. You know, I know that some members of the Planning Commission, or the City Council do listen to our meetings. I see one of our council colleagues here now, I think, and it just, you know, if there's some way to let the record show that the Planning Commission did ask that question, take into consideration, and was assured that current processes would not be affected by passage of this. I just think that might help ease concerns.
And those procedures, as well as the website links, are included in the staff report. And the attached map that we had up on the screen earlier highlighted all the existing streets where those parking restrictions are in effect.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Any other questions or comments? I think it seems like general consensus or agreement for the policy and some preference for the 1,500 number as the threshold. So with that, we'll close the work session. Anything else on that, Mr. Stoddard, you think?
No, that's all. Thank you.
And we'll move on to item 6B, which is the other work session, action item tonight before us is the Sharrow Avenue Bridge Design and Replacement. Mr. Stoddard.
All right. Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. I'll introduce this item briefly. This should feel very familiar. This is, for the Commission, it's the review of a bridge design, which is due to be reconstructed soon. It is I'm sorry, I should include the title. This is the Sharrow Avenue Bridge Design and Replacement. The request tonight, if I can jump down to line 2. Oh, there we go. You're already there. So you all are requested to make a recommendation to the City Council as well as Virginia Department of Transportation, VDOT, who we're in partnership with to manage this bridge project, and we're very thankful to have their support. Obviously, maintaining infrastructure is one of the important government responsibilities, so we're glad to be in partnership with them to get this project done. The recommendation here, staff has provided a recommended motion, and it's based on past guidance that you all have provided on other bridge projects, and it emphasizes pedestrian-oriented design, connecting to near streamside trails, as well as the adjacent Oak Street Elementary School. By way of background and Planning Commission authority, on line 11, the review of civic infrastructure is within the Planning Commission's scope of responsibilities. Section 1705 of the city charter is quoted below, and the underlying section there emphasizes that the Planning Commission is supposed to consider and suggest the design of bridges, as well as of a range of other public facilities. For folks looking for more information on this, VDOT is going to host an information session later this month on the evening of Tuesday, August 20th. They'll hold a session at 7:30 p.m. In the Oak Street Elementary cafeteria. Background and conditions, line 29. I don't think we have a map of this, so I'll just describe it verbally. The Sharrow Avenue Bridge is adjacent to, I guess, I'll have to double check the name of that park. Is that at the south entrance to Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park? And then it's sort of south and east of Oak Street Elementary. The bridge, I guess, was last constructed in 1980, and it's designed to carry people on foot, people on bikes, as well as people on cars and driving trucks. Staff analysis, line 34. Urban design is one of those important things around civic infrastructure. There has been a lot of literature on the importance of design and architecture about the way people feel about a community, the way they treat each other, the way they feel at the end of the day and throughout their day. And there are things that can often be done with design choices that don't actually cost any money, but they do dramatically improve the benefit of the project. And so some of this just comes to having a standard detail that sort of emphasizes pride and the ultimately sort of the transportation choices that the community wants to emphasize. Line 43, for further history, the city did recently construct 2 bridges, one on North Van Buren and one on South Oak. And those were both well done and well completed, and there were some typical design elements. One travel lane in each direction at 11 feet, and then tightening up the curb line so that there was not the invitation to park on the bridge itself. And then any extra space, because typically the underlying bridge isn't changed, and so really this is the design of the deck above. So it's not really changing the capital cost of the bridge, it's just how you treat the deck above. That extra space, if the lanes are set at 11 feet and there's no extra on the sides for parking, then that extra space was contributed to the adjacent sidewalks. And then we also made ramp and crosswalk connections to the Stream Valley trails. Commonly, there is a Stream Valley Trail because, of course, bridges are in low points and they cross streams, and so often there's a trail right there. And so it's a great idea to one, highlight that it's a bridge so people recognize that there is a connection to nature happening, and then provide that pedestrian connectivity and safety. You can see on the next page, the upper picture that's on the screen now is courtesy of Google Maps. It's a photo of existing conditions. You can see it's some pavement that's deteriorating, some driveway aprons adjacent that are not ADA compliant. But you can see there are some good features. There are ramps. There used to be a striped crosswalk, and there is a trail that moves to the off screen to the left. The second image, this is courtesy of VDOT. This is the bridge they recently reconstructed on South Oak. And you can see what a difference the design of this bridge makes versus the one above. One, the pavement and the bridge are in good condition. The bridge railing has been treated as an architectural feature to really highlight that connection to nature. The travel lanes were set at a standard 11 feet. The sidewalk was widened, and then it's off screen to the left here, but actually, based on comments from the commission, we found a way to make it ADA accessible. There was a utility pole that was in the middle of the sidewalk, and we found a way to work that out. Fiscal impact, next section. The project is already fully funded. It was in the council's most recently adopted budget. Bridges are expensive. The expected cost is over $5 million, but that's not coming out of local funds. That's actually coming out of a federal grant program for infrastructure reinvestment. Timing, the funding was originally awarded in 2023. Engineering was started in July of that year. We got a better cost estimate, and additional funding was awarded again in partnership with VDOT. They'll be hosting a public meeting, as I mentioned, on August 20th, and then construction is expected to begin in August of 2026, and that allows enough time to complete engineering as well as go through the required procurement steps. With that, maybe what we'll do is return to the required motion, so that's up on the, or requested motion, so that's up on the screen. You can see items 1 through 5. What staff is recommending is to clarify one travel lane at a width of 11 feet, one in each direction. Any additional space be given over to wider sidewalks. That's point number 2. Number 3 is to make sure that the crosswalk striping goes back in. Number 4 is that we affirm that we've got ADA accessibility all the way to the intersection with Cameron, and that the design of the guardrail match what's been done on the recent bridges. And based on Planning Commission's recommendation from last time, we recommend that there only be a railing on one side, and that is the side with the stream. And with that, I'll close my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So this is an action item, it is a public hearing. Do we have anybody here who's wants to speak on this item, Mr. Trainer?
No, Mr. Chair.
Anybody in the audience? Okay, so we'll turn over to the commissioners.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, there is a hand
I'm sorry.
raised.
Oh, my apologies. Moving too fast.
Hi, I'm Arthur Hagan. I'm the chair of the CACT. I'm going to make these statements as myself, not as the chair. I wanted to just ask that with the construction of this bridge, that thought be given to the impacts to Oak Street Elementary. There is already a significant issue with that side of Oak Street Elementary and parked cars waiting for student pickup later. The CACT is working on a memorandum to speak to that for City Council. We just want to make sure that whatever design for this bridge comes to play, it is relatively close to that area. Cars do back up. In fact, they do back up, I believe, onto the bridge at school release. So we just want to make sure that that is taken into consideration and preferably make the situation better, but at a minimum, make it no worse. That's it.
Thank you. Other commenters? Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting it come before us. It's hard to tell from the drawings what it is, but I do agree that we should maximize the opportunity. The two examples of the other bridges on Van Buren and Oak Street are good examples. The utility pole anecdote is a good one. That if it wasn't for the discussion with the commission, then who knows what would have happened to that. One question I have on the process, so this money was awarded competitively from VDOT. Are they anticipating changes from council or from the commission? So how does the competitive award affect anything we would do up here?
So a lot of the competitiveness of the award is avoiding collapsing infrastructure. So bridges are required to have state of good repair assessments done on a regular basis, and then there's a list. Everyone submits their data, and then VDOT looks at that list and tries to help the bridges most in need. And so that's what elevated Sharrow to the top of the list. The bridges in the city are all safe to travel. What typically happens as a bridge is getting older is that you'll start to see weight restrictions put on it, and so you'll see that it was maybe originally rated for a higher weight truck, and then you'll see that come down, and then eventually no trucks at all. And so Sharrow is moving into that position. So this won't affect the competitive positioning of the city's bridge, and a lot of these things, as I said, should be within sort of a typical design, so long as they're communicated early. And the materials that were submitted are really about the water engineering of the bridge. What is the structure of the culvert? What are the flows of the bridge? What are the flood rates? Really, the design that's available at this point really isn't about that top side in the architecture, and we have been communicating what our expectations are for design throughout. So I don't think this will be a surprise. I think it'll just clarify what it is we're looking for.
Thank you for that. Comments, questions from commissioners? Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Of the many things on which I'm not an authority, bridge design has got to be at the top of the list. But I do remember when we did the bridge over in East Falls Church that, well, where you were going there at the end about the water engineering of the bridge. There was a lot of work done on that bridge. Presumably it was mostly above and probably not too much down at the stream level, but when the bridge opened, there was some sentiment in the community that flooding around the bridge got worse. And, we were assured that that was just a coincidence of, more excessive rain falls that we are seeing now in this era of global climate change. And that, in fact, the work that had been done on the bridge was not in any way related to, the incidents of flooding that neighbors observed. But that did remind me to bring it up here and now so that folks understand that this bridge is designed for whatever the modern standards are. This is again, another question, not a statement, but I presume this bridge is designed in terms of water engineering to accommodate whatever the 10 or 20 or 100-year flood design requirements are now, and have those changed any in recent years? Is there anything that we learned from previous work on the other bridges that would be applied to this that would alleviate any concerns about, bridge work changing the terrain or somehow of the stream in a way that made it more likely for it to flood than it did before?
Yeah, so bridges are at the low point of local topography because it's where the water goes downhill. So bridges are always at the bottom of whatever that cross section is. And when I talk about the water engineering that goes into it, a lot of what is looked at is depending on a different year storm, how much water is going to move through that bridge for the integrity of the bridge. What you're trying to avoid with the design is what's called an overtopping, where there's so much water that it doesn't go under the bridge, it actually goes over top of it. And so bridges are designed with that in mind so that there is enough clearance that all the water can make it through the bridge without overtopping. And by designing it that way, what you ensure is that the bridge doesn't become a choke point. And so if there is sort of flooding somewhere else, it shouldn't be because of the bridge.
Ms. Coma?
Just a couple things. It may just be me, but, well, first of all, I think it would have been helpful in the staff report if we could have had a picture of each of the two new bridges. Since we're being asked to weigh in on the design details, it would have been, I kept looking in the package for the design, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And then I realized you were just kind of referring to the two bridges that we built. So next time, maybe put the pictures in there. That would be helpful. I live very close to one of them, obviously, and this bridge, future bridge, current bridge and future bridge. It might be a personal preference. I don't find the decorative guardrails on the top. I find them very bulbous and not very appealing personally, but that's probably just a personal preference. So it's fine if we want to match them, it's fine. I would go with something a little lighter, more delicate, maybe more elegant. Then they look like a big Lego piece or something stuck together to me. So if you're asking for my design opinion, that's what it is. Otherwise, the bridge looks great.
Yes. There is a kit of parts from which you can order, and all of these rails, because there's a stream, they're designed to be crash resistant so that a typical vehicle can't fall through the
Over top.
railing.
Okay.
And so there's a set of, there's a series of 4 things that you can choose from, about 4. You could pay for more, but what we found is that sticking with a standard kit and then trying to add something sort of Virginia-esque to it, the multicolor stone is supposed to be reminiscent of Hokie stone. But I think more importantly, what we're trying to do is just emphasize that there is a bridge and that there is a connection between the built environment and the natural environment.
So they are literally Legos. I like it. That's what you're telling me. That's what I'm hearing.
It's very
Okay.
sturdy.
The 11-foot recommendation for the lanes, I was curious about that. I know narrower is better. And so I'm curious why you went with 11 and not 10?
We've typically, when we've designed intersection, throats of intersections or bridges, pinch points in the roadway, where the conversation in the community to date has landed is on that 11-foot width. Because of the proximity of the school, although the buses are usually traveling in one direction, not two, because there are going to be buses in close proximity, the 11 is probably a more comfortable distance. It is on streets where there aren't going to be multiple buses at the same time, or people are going to be able to sort of pause and wait and move around each other. I think moving to a 10-foot would certainly work. But I think bridges, you need to have that expectation of two-way traffic and larger vehicles. I think the 11 is a reasonable number.
Yeah, there are sometimes 2 buses passing, definitely. So I think it's a good idea to design it so as not to encourage parking on the bridge. People do park regularly there, which is surprising. is there going to be signage for that, or we're just going to design? I mean, the other bridge doesn't have any sort of signage. It's just obvious that there's not space to park. It's going to be a similar kind of situation, right?
Right.
Okay. And then I think this is on the, related to another item in our agenda for tonight. It's on the future bicycle route. So any consideration for how we might prepare this area to function as a future bicycle route? I know you suggested the bench on the northwest bank or southwest, I can't remember. To the left, if you're facing the stream to the left, right, in that area, which I think is great. But was there any other consideration to how the bike plan fits into this?
When we had done our analysis, I think this falls into that category of the low-stress streets. And so generally where we've seen other communities land on low-stress streets is that sort of a shared lane sort of setup should work. I think it's a good question, and it's something we could probably look at again. I guess what I'd want to make sure is that we can stay within the dimension standards of the underlying culvert.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is all from me.
Mr. Ira, then Mr. Stevens.
I'm not a bridge designer. I have no idea what to recommend on height, width, any of that stuff. But I did want to make a couple of comments just on process, and I know that's not necessarily in this resolution, but I do recall with the Oak Street Bridge that it seemed like there was very little communication about when the project was started. There was very little communication about the duration of the project. And I think there was a lot of people, because I live sort of in that area, that wanted to know how long was this project going to go on for. And I know there can be delays in especially bridge projects, but I think having effective communication on the duration of the project, also the start date of the project, I think would be really good, also considering that there's a school right there. And as one of the speakers mentioned, people line up to pick up their kids or drop off their kids right onto the street where now it will be closed off because there'll be bridge construction. So there's got to be good communication with the school, and the school needs to communicate with the parents, and an alternative sort of drop-off, pickup routine has to be implemented during the construction of this bridge. So we just need to communicate better about our infrastructure that we are putting in, and making sure that all the residents around the bridge and all the people that come into that area due to the school know and have an expectation of how long this project will go on for. The Oak Street Bridge is beautiful. It took forever. It took a very long time. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm pretty sure there were massive delays on this project for whatever reason. I don't know the reasons, but we should try not to replicate that with this bridge. So those are all my comments.
Points. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, just a quick follow on Commissioner Comont's raising the subject of biking. Is the expectation that kids on bikes would travel in the same lanes as the cars?
So, yeah, when I mentioned a shared roadway, that would be sort of the thinking behind it. And the way you're asking the question is probably inviting a conversation about on what are some other ways to do that. I think one thing that could be maybe considered is that depending on how wide, especially maybe the sidewalk on the side of the bridge that the school is on, if you could get that sidewalk up as wide as maybe 10 feet, you might be able to create sort of a better experience. If people did want to stay on their bike, they might be able to get up onto, you could almost treat it like a mixed-use trail. I'm not sure how you'd get in and out of it depending on which direction you're going, so it probably deserves some work. Right, there's always a challenge designing bike facilities, especially with spot improvements. It's a little tricky. But I think that's one of the design comments we could probably communicate back is, what is a way to accommodate either bike facilities with the installation of the bridge or at a future date.
Yeah, if we want kids to ride their bikes to school, and I think we do, they have to feel safe. So I guess my only request is, if we give some thought to what's the best way, given all the constraints, to make kids feel as safe as possible. The other thought in that regard is that the North Underwood Bridge has a couple of speed bumps on there that are not particularly bike friendly. So if there's any features of the bridge, if, again, giving some thought to how kids on bicycle, or anybody on a bike for that matter, how would the experience be in terms of the design that's expected, just so that it's not something that isn't considered until maybe too far along. So that's the only comment area that I had.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Duncan?
Just one more question. You mentioned at the beginning about the price tag, which is $5 million something, and that while we're not paying for that directly, it leads me to ask if for some reason delays are encountered or obstacles are surfaced that we don't anticipate, is there a contingency for it to cost more than $5 million, and where does the money come from if it does? And
That cost estimate should include contingency. Typically at design, there's a pretty hefty contingency that's included, and then as it gets closer to construction or even into construction, you'll see that contingency come down. So I'll confirm it, but I assume that 5% includes a contingency.
Okay. Mr. Hires' points well taken on the communications about the bridge, too. I think that would be an opportunity for the Office of Communications to make sure that everybody is well informed on what's going on and when it's going on, and there'll be coordination with the schools and all that. But, just for the record, we are thinking about that and taking it into consideration, and appreciate the CACT chair for coming and sharing that thought with us.
I'll just make a plug. It's not going to work in this situation, but one of the ways to bring down cost and to really accelerate delivery is actually to close and again, it's not going to work in this situation, but closing the road during construction is the best thing you can do for cost. Because typically what happens is the road crew is allowed to start at 7, and so they spend an hour mobilizing to shut down the road. They work for a few hours, and then it's hot, so they have a break and they have lunch, and then they work a little more, and then they've got to break down, before the rush, I think at either 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so in any given day, they're doing about 6 hours of work because of the restrictions on work hours. For the WNOD crossings, we actually took the approach of entirely closing down, not Great Falls, not Little Falls because of the fire station, but on the smaller streets, Spring and Oak, we closed one while we kept the other open, and then we flip-flopped, and that really made construction go a lot faster, and it saved a lot of taxpayer expense in terms of the cost of construction. You get rid of the need for flaggers, temporary signals, cones, and just all those hours of work that are set up and takedown each day.
Can I follow up? Oh,
My
sorry.
experience, I think, just my experience on Southwest Street when we, dug it up 5 or 6 or 7 years ago and went down to the ground and just closed it, except for, driveway traffic, is that people are actually okay with that, as long as they understand, like Derek said, when it starts, when through this, method, it's going to finish sooner than it might have, and it does finish at a date that's pretty close to when was promised. That tends to increase civic enthusiasm for projects like this. Thank you.
They totally closed Oak Street, right? I mean, when that bridge was built, that's not the expectation here for Sharrow?
I'll have to double check on what their construction management plan is going to be. It is tough to build half a bridge at a time. And so it may be the plan to close it entirely, but that just, right, it just she sort of reemphasizes that need for what is the pickup and drop-off plan and the maintenance of traffic.
Yeah, I mean, they're really going to have to align down Cameron or something like that. I don't know. That's for the schools to figure out. But yeah, I agree that communication is definitely important. It is a busy area for that pickup line. More kids walking and biking to school, fewer parents picking them up would be good too.
Well, there is the precipitous drop in the percentage of kids that walk and bike to school since the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then it just fell off. And then you're in this sort of chicken and egg where everyone says, oh, it's not safe because of all the people that are driving, so I'm going to drive my child to school. And it's an unfortunate thing because what you end up with is just a lot of people driving to school, and you can see that really long line of cars that actually represents a surprisingly small number of people. If they were all on the sidewalk, it would take up a lot less space than all those cars that are queued up.
Here, here. Well, I think we've covered a lot of this. I don't, if there's any other comments, I think we're probably ready for a motion. Who would like to make the motion? Mr. Duncan's already said he can't do it.
Oh, all right, I'll do it. Let's see. So this is for the Sharrow Avenue Bridge design and replacement. Whereas the city charter provides for the Planning Commission to make recommendations on the design of bridges in the city to the City Council, and whereas the design of bridges is important to community character in addition to providing transportation needs for pedestrian and bicycle traffic as well as automobile traffic, and whereas Sharrow Avenue is a major pedestrian route for accessing Oak Street Elementary School and connects to the city's recently restored Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park and crosses Trips Run, one of the city's 2 watersheds, and whereas the recent South Oak Street Bridge replacement project provides a good example of design features to be included in future bridge projects in the city. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommends to the City Council that the Sharrow Avenue Bridge be designed to include the following elements: 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction with a maximum lane width of 11 feet, without additional room for on-street parking on the bridge. 2, wider pedestrian sidewalks on each side and the installation of a bench on the northwest side of the bridge overlooking the stream. 3, restriping of the crosswalk crossing Sharrow Avenue to provide direct access to the stream side trail. 4, that ADA accessibility be confirmed for sidewalks on both sides of Sharrow Avenue to the intersection with West Cameron Road. And 5, decorative guardrails on the northwest side of the bridge that mimics the design of the South Oak Street Bridge.
Thank you. It's been moved.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Stevens.
Before you all move it to a vote, did you want to modify, maybe to mention, I think I heard accommodating bike design, which might fit under number 2, maybe merged with sort of improved pedestrian and bicycle features. And then I think there are probably 2 separate items. 6, that there be clear communication about the start and duration of construction, and 7, that sort of traffic management plans be designed in coordination with the schools.
Those both sound good.
Sounds good to me. Do we need to figure out wording here?
Yes.
That's always the trick.
I think number 2 could maybe be wider pedestrian sidewalks and consideration for bicycle facilities.
That's an easy change. Wider pedestrian sidewalks on each side and consideration of bicycle facilities. And the installation of a bench, and then the rest. In number 4, is there a typo? ADA accessibility be confirmed for sidewalks on both, should it be sides of Sharrow Avenue? And then number 6 was about communication. This is really about the design of the bridge. So I guess I'm wondering, does that fit in I'm happy to include it.
It's a concern you've raised, and it's probably worth putting on the record now so that when they go
Okay.
to the public hearing, I think VDOT has the benefit of saying, hey, we've already heard, we need to think through maintenance of traffic, and here's what we're going to do.
Great. So I'm just thinking about how to place it under this header. So the intro to this is the Sharrow Avenue Bridge be designed to include the following elements. So is this sort of like a separate section after?
I think you could do it the same way. I think you could say, and that the construction management plan,
And that
so I think it could be that the construction management plan be designed in coordination with school staff to accommodate school pickup and drop-off.
Yeah, that sounds good. And clearly communicated to the community.
Can you repeat that? Construction management plan.
Be designed in coordination with the schools, I think is the way you put it. That works. To, how did you put it, to facilitate pickup and drop-off procedures? And clearly communicated to the community.
Okay. Does
Okay.
the original motioner accept the edits?
Yep.
The seconder?
Yes.
Okay. We can move on to a roll call vote, Mr. Trainer.
Okay, I'll start with Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra,
Yes.
and Mr. Puentes.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. All right. Good edits. Thanks for that. All right, let's move on to our work session items. A little ahead of schedule. That's good. Let's start with the bike plan update.
All right.
Mr. Stoddard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm going to set this one up briefly before I turn it over to our lead planner on this one of our principal planners, Ms. Carrie Nino. The request tonight is for the Planning Commission to hold what will be your final, what we recommend be your final work session on this item, the update to the bicycle master plan. You all have held previous work sessions on this, but obviously there have been improvements to it since that time, so we'll walk through those. In terms of the final schedule of sort of what to expect, this is scheduled for your final consideration at your September 4th meeting. The City Council is expected to hold the final work session the day before on September 3rd. And then council final consideration of the plan is scheduled for September 23rd. And that plan is solidifying updates, if adopted, is solidifying updates to the policy document, the priority routes to implement first, and then the locally preferred design alternative for those three priority routes, northwest, southwest, and the secondary schools connection. Final design is still to be completed. We've already had a lot of good input from the neighborhoods about what to consider, right? They are the local experts in those streets. They live them every day. And so that expertise is going to be added into the designs to improve the designs. And if the plan's adopted in September, staff will get to work on those refined designs and be able to present those to the community in the spring of =25. Just to go back to where I started, as a final work session, there are a number of questions that staff is seeking input on, reaffirming with the commission the priority routes to implement first. Any thoughts on the conceptual designs that have been presented to the community to date? The timeline for moving through refined designs and ultimately construction. We also have recommended stations for expansion of Capital Bike Share. Want to get your thoughts on those, any comments you have on the planning document itself, and then, of course, any thoughts you have on the draft motion that's been provided for you. So that those 6 items. And just by way of background, further by way of background, just on process, we are at the end of what's been a lengthy process, and I think it's been a very thoughtful process. It's been a very sort of rational process, where we started with a clearly defined scope in the council's 2-year work plan. We used that scope to engage with key stakeholders in the community on vision and routes. We used that then to identify the priority routes. We prepared conceptual designs, many different kinds of designs. We vetted those with the community, and that's how we landed on the locally preferred alternatives that are in the draft plan at this point. And really, as I said, what this plan is doing is establishing all those pieces as the direction that the community wants to go, with the understanding that the routes themselves are going to be refined through additional design and presented well ahead of construction. But with that, by way of setup, I will turn it over to our lead planner, Ms. Carrie Odnino.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Hi, I'm Carrie Odnino. Good evening, Chair Puentes and members of the Planning Commission. As Mr. Stoddard noted, The Planning Commission is requested to receive an update regarding the bicycle master plan update and provide feedback on the plan document, as well as the direction, schedule, and estimates for the conceptual designs for the priority routes. If the update to the plan document is approved, staff will continue to revise the designs for the 3 priority routes of Southwest Street, Northwest Street, and the East-West connection by incorporating community-requested features, including traffic calming and pedestrian safety features. Revised plans would be shared with the community through a second round of walking tours in the spring of 2025. So moving on to background, some additional background. The Planning Commission last reviewed materials during a March 20th work session. Since then, work sessions were held with other boards and commissions in March. There was tabling at Meridian High School in May. The community walking tours were held in June, and a postcard mailer was sent to residents located along the priority routes in July. If we want to look at the council staff report, there's a table on line 33 that summarizes comments from City Council, Planning Commission, Environmental Sustainability Council, and the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation members from the February and March meetings and any associated response. As Mr. Stoddard noted earlier, there was the council work plan and scope of work. If we look at line 35, and as you know, the city's first bicycle master plan was adopted in 2015, and the Virginia Tech Student Study was conducted in 2022. So there's been a lot of conversation and interest in bicycle facilities within the community over the past few years, and we want to continue to support bicycling as a mode of transportation per our environmental goals and vision from the Mobility for All Modes chapter of the comprehensive plan of meeting additional travel demand through alternative modes of transportation. So the council work plan for fiscal years 23 and 24 called for an update to the bicycle master plan that included developing safe routes to school for biking to the secondary schools campus. And the proposed scope of work is outlined from lines 48 through 52. Now looking at master plan updates, line 55. The attached existing conditions report from the consultant details existing and planned bike facilities and analyzes the city's bike network using a level of stress analysis. Staff efforts are premised on an all ages and abilities model and expanding safe biking options for all groups of riders, particularly those in the interested but concerned category. A significant takeaway from the report is the prevalence of islands of low-stress streets across the city, but with significant barriers separating them, as shown in the figure on page 8. If we want to kind of scroll down to page 8. So you can see on this islands of low stress map, the different colors represent different islands of low stress streets that are connected to one another, with more stressful streets like Broad Street and Washington Street separating these islands from one another. In terms of identifying priority routes, line 70, staff engaged the community through various board and commission meetings and general community events as shown in the table on line 74. Staff used the input from the community events as well as professional judgment to identify 6 priority routes. 3 of those routes were identified for near-term implementation in the next 3 years, including the East-West connection, Northwest Street, and Southwest Street. And the priority routes of East Broad Street, Park Avenue, between Virginia Avenue and Northwest Street, and Great Falls Street were moved to later term implementation to follow those first 3 routes, to phase workload and more closely tie public engagement with implementation. Now looking at preliminary design on line 88, staff prepared conceptual designs for the 3 priority routes and presented the cross sections at a series of community and neighborhood meetings. During the meetings, meeting participants also requested traffic calming and pedestrian access improvements, as well as consideration for parking utilization and operational impacts for trash and recycling pickup. A brief 2 or 3 sentence description of the concepts shown in the staff report is provided in the appendix of the draft plan update. So if we want to scroll down, so staff proposes refining the concepts for the routes and engaging in a second round of community meetings during the spring of 2025. So line 105, you can see the concepts for the east-west connection. The image shown for Offutt Drive is a cross-section, so you can see existing parking and travel lanes remaining the same, and wayfinding signage and shared roadway markings being provided. Looking at, if we scroll down a bit, look at the cross-section for the 10-foot shared use path between Birch Street and Haycock Road, that would be constructed in the grassy area between the gates of West Falls and the Falls Plaza condominiums and adjacent to the property at 1026 Birch Street. Moving down to line 109, looking at the concepts for Northwest Street and looking at the cross-section from the city-county line to Steeples Court. The proposal there is to keep the parking lane next to the existing sidewalk, repurpose the parking lane on the other side of the street, and add bike lanes. Parking utilization on the majority of West Street is fairly low, with parking lanes fairly empty along most of the length of the street. So the concept for the block closest to Broad Street is to keep the travel lanes as they are and look at an intersection treatment and shared roadway markings. Line 120, looking at the concepts for Southwest Street and looking at the cross-section from the city-county line to Ellison Street. The proposal there is to keep the parking lane next to the existing sidewalk, repurpose the parking lane on the other side of the street, and add bike lanes. And then looking at the cross-section from Ellison to Broad, the concept there is to look at an intersection treatment, maintain the existing travel lanes and add arrows. So moving on to the capital bike share expansion section, line 131. The city became part of the regional capital bike share system in May 2019. Potential phase 2 stations to add to the system were identified during the initial public engagement. Prior to launch of phase 1 of capital bike share in the city, and because of the federal funding for that first phase, we weren't able to get all of those in during the first round due to the need for city right-of-way or permanent easement for those locations. So funding for bike share phase 2 was appropriated for fiscal years 25 and 26. Station installations are already planned for the West Falls development and Founders Row 2. In addition to those 2 locations, the draft plan update recommends 4 additional locations for capital bike share stations. Those include Park Place near the Broad and Washington development, the Birch and Broad Shopping Center, Hillwood Avenue near Tower Square Shopping Center, and South Oak Street near Fellows Court near the park. The map on page 15 shows existing capital bike share stations in red, planned stations in white, and proposed stations in yellow. And the annual cost of the new proposed stations is approximately $45,000, with some of those being covered through voluntary concessions. Moving down to the fiscal impacts section on line 158. City Council previously appropriated $60,000 in local funds for consultant support for this effort. Assuming approval of the plan update, staff will request funding as part of the fall budget amendment for design and construction of the 3 priority routes listed below on lines 173 to 189. So 1.68 million for the east-west connection, 604,000 for the Northwest Street route, and 720,000 for the Southwest Street route. More information on operating costs for capital bike share will come back, will go to council when staff goes to procure stations for that. Moving on to the timing section of the report, line 195, we kicked off this update with a discussion of scope and schedule in October, did a review of existing conditions and identified priority routes in late fall and winter, reviewed conceptual designs March through June, and now we're looking towards final work sessions and consideration this month and next, with the Planning Commission final action scheduled for September 4th and council final consideration scheduled on September 23rd. So again, staff is looking for any comments on the plan document itself, the proposed path forward for the conceptual designs and outreach, comments on the proposal for capital bike share, and any thoughts on the schedule. So I'd be happy to take any comments or questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Odanino. This is a work session item, and so we've had a lot of comments already. I know you've done a ton of outreach, and so it's helpful to see it all laid out here and the process so far. And as I said, we've received a lot of really great comments. I have some as well, but let me first turn it over to my fellow commissioners to see if anybody wants to kick us off on our end. Mr. Stevens, I'm looking at you.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, I do support the all ages and abilities concept, both as a vision and as a goal. I think several other commenters have recommended that as well. On your question on our views on the priority routes, clearly the connection to the secondary campus has a lot of support in many areas of the city. So, hopefully we will be able to get behind that and bring that to reality. West Street, both north and south, is a more challenging effort. And I was at the public meetings that Carrie led, and there are some pretty passionate points of view expressed by people that live along those streets. So I think we kind of have to have our thoughts together and our strength to go ahead and move ahead on what I believe is overall going to be a big improvement if we can get at least some part of the infrastructure on those routes. I would like to see a little bit more emphasis on the North Washington Street. I know that planning for that hasn't really gotten kicked off yet, and there is some mention of it in the staff report, but I think if there's any way we could add a little bit more emphasis, because that will, I believe, in due course become very important, because it will not only connect Falls Church, some type of a protected lane, with what it looks like Arlington is going to put one on Langston Lane where it would connect, but it would also be very useful as a commuting option when the western entrance to the East Falls Church Metro Station eventually gets implemented. I think that the current level of biking that some people refer to, which is fairly light, I think it's fairly limited as far as the demographics, but I kind of feel that's misleading, and mainly because a lot of people just don't feel safe. And so we have to acknowledge that we need to be designing and building infrastructure for the level of usage that we want, not what's there right now. And I think people from cities that are leading in biking pretty much have that attitude. Also, a lot of the usage data tends to focus just on bike to work, and there are many of us, myself included, that bike a lot, but I don't bike to work anymore, so we don't necessarily get included in usage data that people refer to. So I liked a lot of the comments that we got from our members of the public in the city. Pat Conley's reference to updating our zoning code, more details on bike infrastructure seems like a good thing to note, in my opinion. Also, the need to emphasize the importance of maintenance as part of an overall good biking plan. And finally, the need for bike planning with traffic calming features, so we don't forget that and only find out after we install the facilities that maybe we didn't do as the best that we could for biking. So anyway, those are my thoughts overall. You know, it's a very important effort, and I appreciate the hard work that's gone into bringing it this far. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Sorry for putting you on the spot. It's good. Other comments? Ms. Cobot?
He was prepared. Well, I want to second all of the good comments that Mr. Stevens made. I'm also glad that we are designing to an all ages and abilities standard, and that's part of the vision. I think I asked for a more robust vision, and I think you all have delivered that in this revised version. So, thank you for that. In the clean copy of the plan, there's a reference to 5 goals, but I only counted 4. So I just want to make sure I wasn't missing one, or maybe there was one that was removed, or maybe it's just a miscounting. So that's just a small thing. But I think the goals that we have are good. Provide safe and convenient access, ensure that our network connects, increase bicycling rates, and then maintain, operate, and grow the infrastructure. To follow up on Mr. Stevens' comments on maintenance, there isn't really a section of the plan that kind of deals with maintenance, and that might be something to explore. Even just a few paragraphs on how we plan to maintain the facilities. And I know we have a discussion of like when we decide to create new ones, and I'm glad that you included that little asterisk on paving, and we're clear about like when we're going to be building bike facilities as in connection with repaving. So more information for the community is helpful, and I think adding a section on maintenance would be good. And I think Mr. Stevens also mentioned this. Having more data, being able to say how many residents are biking, if we could install those ped or bike counters in different areas, that would be really helpful. But even, just tracking data about how we're doing on executing against this plan and the level of ridership. I agree that the data we get from census is incomplete. And I also agree there are a lot of people that don't feel comfortable biking, but might if they did. I also agree with Mr. Stevens on the recommendation to take another look at North Washington Street and Arlington's plans, and we may have to learn more about what they're planning. A cycle track would be really exciting, and I don't know exactly how that's going to play with the BRT. I know that's still happening potentially, so I understand why that's complicated, but that's an area that that I think would really benefit from some better bicycle infrastructure. I was just in Bowling Green this past week. They have a lot of kind of raised cycle tracks, like grade separated. They're really just like wide shared use paths. As a cyclist, I'm so much more comfortable on that than in on-street facilities. And I cycle a lot, and I cycle on the street, and it's fine. But, when you're with a friend and you're just riding, it's really very nice. They were on the list of the most improved bicycle communities. Anyway, so I don't think that particular facility was mentioned. That kind of facility was mentioned, shared use in the list. So like a shared use path or a raised cycle track. I'm not sure what the right term for is it, but I would like that to be in the mix. I I noticed in the map that the Greenway Downs Paper Street is listed as an on-street facility. I would consider that. It's like a path. It's a walking path. So to me, I mean, maybe technically it's a street since it's a paper street, but I would change that to the lighter green color. Let's see. As far as the feedback on the prioritization of the routes, I agree with Mr. Stevens that there's a lot of good energy behind the east-west connection. It will really benefit the community as a whole, not just the schools, but everybody who wants to get to the that new West End development. So I'm optimistic about that. I agree that the West Street facilities we don't really have a very good sort of north-south connection. I mean, at least we have Park Avenue going east-west, which is a quieter road, but we don't really have a great north-south, maybe apart from Howard E. Herman, which, a lot of people ride on. So I think getting facilities on those roads would be really helpful. I generally, like, as far as the proposed facilities, I see a lot of Sharrows, which I'm not a fan of Sharrows. They do not seem ambitious enough to me. But I understand that we are sort of, in the early stages of public discussions on this. But for my personal preference, I would like to see more robust facilities that really will help to make people safe rather than just forcing them to ride with cars. So what were the other things that staff was looking for feedback on? I'm sorry I missed that list. I don't know if it was in the staff report or
It wasn't. We built it in our prep sessions.
Okay.
So it didn't make it into the staff report, but it was priority routes, the conceptual designs, the timeline to come out of the plan and then get into final design and construction, the bike share expansion, the plan document itself, and the recommended motion.
just that. I think that's the only thing I haven't weighed in on is maybe the capital bike share. And I think the station do you want us to weigh in on the station locations, the cost, like?
Yeah, several of them. And actually, Mr. Trainer, if we're able to go to that map, which I think might be in the staff report.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's the second map. I think it'll be above that. Or below.
It's page
156.
page 15.
It's definitely not exactly where you are.
Yep.
Yep, and if you can rotate that, I think 3 times. And so, Ms. O'Neill, if you want to walk through sort of what is red, what is yellow, which stations are actually already covered under voluntary concessions from ongoing development.
Right, so red is what we already have, what's currently operating. So Founders Row, currently that's covered through, the operations and maintenance is covered through voluntary concession there. And then Founders Row 2, which is planned, and it's in white, it's number 12. That one would also be covered by a voluntary concession, as well as the West Falls Church Development Station, number 11. And the Park Place, Broad and Washington Development Station, number 15. That's proposed. We still need to confirm that that location will work. But that would be covered by a voluntary concession. And then number 14 is the one near Oak and Fellows. That one is proposed. We need to confirm that the location works. That would not be covered by a voluntary concession. And neither would Hillwood Avenue proposed location number 16, which would be near the Tower Square shopping center, and then also the Birch and Broad Shopping Center parking lot number 13. That would not be covered by a voluntary concession.
Oh, I see, 13. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there would be 4 new ones that would not be covered. What's the amount of time that the sort of development-funded stations are covered? Because it's a limited amount of time, right? It's like 5 years or 10 years, or is it in perpetuity?
I think it's the length of the project for.
It is,
That's
okay.
what the standard language we've been getting.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. I thought it was less amount of
No,
time.
it's built into their transportation demand management plan, so I think that, right, the default in the city code is everyone's going to drive to the site. And I don't think that's going to hit the city's environmental goals, nor is it actually going to fit in the right-of-way. And so these transportation demand management plans are about figuring out other ways for people to get to and from the site. And so that's the justification for them picking up the station operations, is that they're accommodating travel to and from their sites.
Great. So you're proposing 4 new ones that the yellow is funded or not funded?
So it would be 3 that would not be covered by voluntary concession. So we had to take the one on Park Place. So we took it out because it was low ridership and all that construction was starting for Broad and Washington, and then we moved that one to Eden Center.
Got it. Okay.
And then, so it's to put one back
Yeah.
on Park Place to go with the VC that we have for Broad and Washington.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
The locations look great to me. Again, speaking of data, it would be helpful to know sort of what the ridership is. Is there a regular report for that? I feel like we've seen that before.
That's publicly available data. Yeah, so it's the highest, I believe Eden Center and Founders Row were the highest the last time that
Roosevelt, too.
Roosevelt is also high, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
that makes sense.
Yeah, so that the areas with the highest residential and commercial density have the highest,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, ridership. So,
Okay. I think that's it for me.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I think first I want to just say thank you to the staff for your efforts in this regard. My recollection of the discussion of this issue goes back to, I think, about 2012, when there was a pitchfork and burning of effigies session at the community center over the community's response to the initial effort to go down the road that we have traveled over the last 12 years. And I commend you for your knowledge of the past history of this and really working hard to try to reach out to the community, to communicate what you're doing, to do even more than you have about letting folks know when there's opportunities to speak to this, to walk down the streets, et cetera. In keeping with, my earlier vote on the commercial parking issue, it's very important that we do as much as we reasonably can do to encourage people in Falls Church to walk or bike or scoot or golf cart or do something besides drive a 4,000-pound vehicle around on our streets. And so I'm very supportive of the effort here. Turn the page to what I guess some might call a more parochial concern, but I did want to disclose that I live on Southwest Street, and as you all know, because you've walked the streets with the neighbors as well as Northwest, but I was able to attend the Southwest Street session. There are, quite strong feelings among all the folks who were at that event. Cyclists, residents. I don't know if any businesses were represented, but businesses would have some opinions about how we stripe Southwest Street to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve. I don't have a lot to add to what you've already heard from council a couple of nights ago. They took a good hard bite at this, and at least 3 council members expressed their opinion, if I can speak, or if I can paraphrase them, not speak for them, but if I can just paraphrase them, that given the infusion of commercial activity at Founders Row 2, which is, reasonably close to unprecedented in any other intersection in the city. I know Broad and Washington, obviously has been a big project, but, it's rare to find both corners, 2 corners of an intersection under heavy redevelopment with, plans to open. Of course, Founders Row is already substantially open, but the theaters are not in yet. And Founders 2 is going to be coming online over the next 12 to 18 months. As was shared with those council members, there's some desire to assess the impact of those developments before we do anything too dramatically different from what we have on Southwest Street, first block now. And I would share that sentiment. I think that, parking utilization now in the first block of Southwest Street, and let me say, I don't really have a dog in this hunt because I live at the T of the intersection of Parker, and I don't have any parking in front of my house. I've got a stop sign and a fire hydrant, so occasionally do use the on-street parking there, but I can see both ways. I can see that it'd be easier to get out of my driveway if there were a bike lane on my side of the street than it would be now with a parking lane. So this is not really my personal opinion, but I know that some neighbors, of course, you've already heard from and you'll hear more from. And I would just encourage us to be open to their concerns and what you heard from council about, if there's any way to, as quickly, as nimbly as possible, assess the impact of Founders and Founders 2 on the parking utilization of the first block of Southwest Street. Same thing's probably true of the first block of Northwest Street. I'm a little less familiar with that. But I would encourage us to, as we continue to go through the process, to be especially attuned to that. Both those developments, as was mentioned, have substantial structured parking garages. And the idea, when I supported them, is that people who work there, patronize there, live there, that those garages are going to carry pretty much all that is needed in the way of parking, especially as we move to a community that relies less on vehicles to get everywhere we go. But, it's a work in progress. I think we all have to acknowledge that, and that at least for a time. A new building has some growing pains. The Kensington, which I supported, we should have had a more robust TDM to take into account that, folks who work there are coming and going at hours that are not conducive to use of mass transit. There's just not a lot of buses that run for the 5 o'clock shift. We should have been more attuned to that, and fortunately we benefit from that experience in the more recent developments. That's all a long way of saying that as a practical matter, I'd love to see us render, because people tend to, in a long document, focus on the pictures. I personally, and I can only speak for myself here, and I don't expect the staff to bend to the will of one commissioner, but I personally think it would be helpful to have in circulation, or at least available, a rendering of what Southwest Street and Northwest Street would look like if basically the current conditions prevailed, with the parking on both sides of the street, sharrows for the bicycle accommodations. It's basically where you end up when you get to Ellison Street. That block between Ellison and Broad Street is, as you indicated, you've got the picture of that.
Right.
It's a mosh pit. Everybody mashes together, and that's actually good, because the more mashing together, the more people are attuned, at least in my experience of riding bikes back when I was younger, and in other places in Europe where cycling is more common. I would like to just see, for public relations purposes, if nothing else, a rendering of South and Northwest Street in the documents that shows, well, here's another alternative. You can take that or leave that if you want. Staff may feel strongly that they want to just show one alternative, but I'd prefer to see two. I guess the only other thought that I would share is that one thing I've never been a big fan of is the use of the phrase bike master plan, because it doesn't really communicate the efforts that I referred to earlier that you all have gone to make this a, streets for all uses plan. And when you call it bike master plan, it conveys to some folks that interest group is preeminent. And it is important, and it's more important than it was 12 years ago because we are changing as a city for the good. But still, there's, a lot of folks who have to drive their cars, a lot of folks who are concerned about traffic calming. They'd rather see whatever money we spent directly on traffic calming measures, the more traditional traffic calming measures. And, that horse has kind of left the barn and already run up towards the mountain, so I don't expect you to change your nomenclature. But just in terms of how you describe it, when I hear the council will take, final action on this on September 23rd, that sounds kind of final to me. And I know it isn't, because then you turn the page and explain, but it's just the beginning, because we're going to have another round of public meetings. We're going to have more opportunities to look at pictures and put sticky notes up and all that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to describe what it is that council is going to do in September or whenever they finally act as final in some sense, a final step of phase one. Try to break it up into, and now we go into phase two, which is where the rubber meets the road. Just in terms of messaging it, I think that might convey the full extent of the work that you all have done to try to take all interests into account. I don't think I have a whole lot to add to that, but like I said, the council meeting Monday night communicated all those concerns pretty succinctly, and those views were expressed by people who don't live on that street.
Right.
So if I'm viewed as parochial, it's not just me that's saying this. So I would encourage you to take that under advisement and to help us move forward by making sure that the community understands that, there are going to be opportunities to tweak this, work with this, adjust this, particularly around the north and southwest intersections where Founders and Founders 2 are going to change the transportation landscape dramatically. I mean, when the theater's open, that's Falls Church 2.0. I mean, we're going to have people coming, from across, a wide area. Many of them will be driving. Many people will walk to the movie theaters from neighborhoods. That'll stretch that, 10 minutes, 15 minutes from a grocery store to 10 minutes, 15 minutes from a major movie theater. And that really will put feet and wheels, bicycles on the ground, I think, in a way that we really fully can't imagine right now. And that's all good. But as we make the journey to that happy land, the immediate concerns of folks that live along South and Northwest streets as to street parking and traffic calming and all the other interests involved should be taken into consideration as seriously as you can. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nino. I agree with a lot of the comments expressed up here today. I think there's been excellent engagement with the public, as I mentioned at the beginning. You've received a lot of great comments from lots of citizens and citizen groups. It's really encouraging to see the enthusiasm for biking in the city. I think that's a lot of your work and a lot of what's going on around the city. For me, in terms of the priority routes, I think that I do think these are good ones. The north-south route is an important one, and I think, West Street is a good option for that, understanding all of the concerns that were expressed. I do think that it makes sense because it is a gap in the network right now. I mean, we've got a lot of east-west, but north-south is really important. So, again, looking forward to further conversations about that, but I think that one makes a lot of sense. And clearly, the secondary campus, again, I know there's more precision still to come, but clearly needs to be a priority, given all the things we've already talked about. The only other thing I have is about the bike share stations. I think those are, as was mentioned, really good locations. Surprised to hear you say that the Park Place one was low ridership one. That's why it was moved. It seems like such a high activity area, so I'm glad that that one's coming back. I know you mentioned that you're trying to see if it can fit. I hope it can. Seems like it would make a lot of sense there. And I'm glad that there seems to be a strategic effort to increase the number of stations in the south side of the city, particularly along down around the commercial corridor, Tower Square. As we continue to expand these, I'm a big fan of the bike share program. I think it's a good spot for us to be is on the south side there. Those are the only comments that I have. Anybody else? Any other commissioners? Anything guys have been expressed? All right. Again, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. One more work session item. Easy one. 7B for the accessory dwelling update. Mr. Stoddard.
Just a question for the commission. So thank you, Chair and members of the commission. Just a question. We've been at it for 2 hours. Just a question. Do people want to stretch for 5 minutes before we launch into the last item?
Anybody opposed? Take a 5-minute break. Trying to make sure we have enough time for all these items, and an important one coming up. So 7B, work session item, accessory dwelling units, accessory dwelling update. Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the commission. I'm going to introduce this briefly before turning it over to our lead staffer on this one, Mr. Jack Trainer. So I'm going to launch into the staff report. Actually, if we can zoom in a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so request section that opens on line 2. The Planning Commission had previously looked at the scope of work for this update. I'm sorry, the title of this is Accessory Dwellings Work Session. Planning Commission earlier this year had looked at a scope of the scope of work for this exercise. This is your first substantive work session on the matter, and so you are requested to receive a presentation from staff and then reflect and provide direction to staff as we move into the next phase of the project. And this is included, this update to the accessory dwellings is directed by the 2-year work plan. This item was included in the last City Council work plan, and it's been included again in the strategic priorities document. Recommendation. Staff is looking for feedback really on 2 groups of items. The first is on the dimensions around accessory dwellings, things like setbacks, heights, floor areas, lot coverages, so the dimensional standards, the physical standards. And then the second group of things is on the programming, the functionality, the use of these things, things that have come up in conversations with other communities and how their regulations are formed, things around occupancy and ownership requirements and limitations, use of the things either as or disallowed for short-term rental, and then also how parking works and how it's regulated for accessory dwellings. And I'm actually going to jump all the way ahead just to explain where we are in the process. If we can jump to line 230 of the staff report. Will be the timing section. And this is something we conveyed in recent public town halls, that this is at the beginning of the process and it's going to move through sort of a scheduled phasing of work. So we are in phase 1, which is in the we're in phase 2 of preliminary workshop. So we wanted to make sure we were scoped properly. That began late last calendar year with initial scoping and preparation. And now we're in phase 2, which is preliminary workshop. So you'll be receiving the same presentation that also went out to Housing Commission, Urban Forestry, Environmental Sustainability Council, as well as used at the 2 open houses. Staff wants to make sure everyone is getting the same information and providing responses to that same information. Staff is going to use the input and guidance from all these sessions to prepare a framework. I'm not sure if term sheet is the right term. It sounds a little too solid. I think we want to explain that this is very much a draft, and so it might be a framework. That'll be presented to the City Council is September 3rd. It's a Tuesday because of the Labor Day holiday on Monday the 2nd. And then it'll go to Planning Commission the very next night, September 4th. We'll be doing more open houses with the community, again, one during the weekday, one during the weekend. And then with the input on that framework, staff will prepare a formal consideration of a proposed zoning ordinance amendment, a code amendment, and we would kick that off with a first reading to make it clear what the council is considering and what they want the community to be aware of and provide input on. We would hold the required work sessions, certainly, as well as sort of a broad outreach to many of the boards and commissions. Again, another round of community open houses before going back to council for final consideration as early as February. And the reason for walking through that is just to remind everybody on the commission, as well as anybody watching, that it is a very deliberate process to go through amending a zoning ordinance. Obviously, it's a weighty item. It has a lot of impacts, or it could have a lot of impacts, and so it's deserving of due consideration, and that's why the schedule is laid out this way. But with that as way of setup, I'll turn it over to Mr. Trainer, who is our staff lead on this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stoddard. As mentioned, I'm going to walk the Planning Commission through that same presentation that we've taken to several boards and commissions, as well as the public, for 2 open house sessions. I know a couple commissioners were in attendance at some of those, so bear with me while I go through this again for some of you. For others, I know this will be the first time, but again, it's the same presentation that we've taken on the road to several different groups, and so this will be the same information. And so the presentation agenda is first. I'll start with what the kind of purpose of this presentation has been for each time we've given it. We'll go over what the definition of accessory dwellings are. We'll go through its definition through some examples of the forms they take, what the benefits are of accessory dwellings as a housing form, as well as the eligibility and existing conditions for accessory dwellings in the city today. We'll talk about why the city is exploring potential updates to its accessory dwelling regulations, and then we'll look again quickly at the public engagement schedule, and then open it up to the commission's work session. So the purpose for this presentation has been to start the conversation, and again, we've had two kind of open house meetings going over the same information. We've been to several boards and commissions getting initial thoughts on accessory dwellings, and now it's the Planning Commission's turn. And then also making sure that we're communicating what accessory dwellings are, the reasons for exploring an update to the city's regulations, and then also making sure we're communicating the public engagement schedule and opportunities to engage as the consideration process plays out. So next, moving into accessory dwellings definition, probably no stranger to this commission. Accessory dwellings are independent living facilities. They're located on the same lot as a single-family home, and they include all the provisions of a independent living unit, including those for living and sleeping areas, kitchen, and bathrooms. There are several forms that accessory dwellings take. These are four of the most common ones. And kind of following, we've collected several kind of real-life picture examples of each form, but kind of as an overview, the first one we'll look at are internal accessory dwellings. On the right here, we've got several kind of diagrams showing where the accessory dwelling is in relation to the primary dwelling, where that primary dwelling is the bluish color and the accessory dwelling is the orangish red. So for internal units, right, they can take up any kind of spare room in the primary dwelling. This could be the basement or the attic. For the attached bump out form, it's bumped out of the primary dwelling or an addition for the purpose of housing that accessory dwelling. For garage conversion, there's kind of two different forms that they can take. One is the conversion of part of the garage to an accessory dwelling. Here it's shown to be, on top of it, or the entire garage can be converted to an accessory dwelling. And then lastly is probably the most commonly thought of form, detached new construction, where a new accessory structure is constructed on the same lot as a primary dwelling for the purpose of housing an accessory dwelling unit. So again, kind of looking at two kind of real-life picture examples of each form. These are two examples of internal accessory dwellings. With the picture on the left, you can see it has its own ingress and egress on the left side of the house, and then the primary dwelling is kind of the right side of the house over here. And then this, on the picture on the right, the accessory dwelling is on the bottom floor here with its entryway down here, and then the top two stories comprise the primary dwelling. For attached bump out, kind of explanatory and probably pretty obvious from these two pictures. You can see where the primary structure, or the primary dwelling unit is in each of these, and then the bumped out accessory dwelling is on the right side of the house in each example. Moving into garage conversion, on the picture on the left, You've got the entire garage structure converted into an accessory dwelling with the primary structure in the foreground here. And on the picture on the right, you've got the top floor of the garage converted to the accessory dwelling with the bottom area still being used for that car storage use. And then lastly, two pictures of the detached accessory dwelling example. Again, in both pictures, you've got the primary dwelling in the foreground and the accessory dwelling constructed in the backyard of the same lot. What are some of the benefits of accessory dwellings? Again, probably not a mystery to the commission, but the first one that we've been talking about is aging in place. Whereas accessory dwellings can provide housing options for multi-generational family members that may want or need to live nearby. So it can add some autonomous housing for family members that may need or want to live nearby those that take care of them. Another benefit is that accessory dwellings can offer supplemental income to the primary dwelling owner if it's rented out. This can help with housing costs. And then the third benefit, third kind of major benefit we've been talking about is accessory dwellings' ability to add some housing diversity and inclusivity by adding what's called gentle density to neighborhoods, which is kind of the idea that you're adding additional density into a neighborhood without affecting the look and feel and character of that neighborhood. So moving along into the motivations behind exploring an update to the city's accessory dwelling legislation. The first is that currently accessory dwellings are highly restrictive in the city. For example, detached accessory dwellings are not permitted to be constructed, so only those attached forms are allowed. Accessory dwellings are also conditional uses in the city today, so this requires a special use permit administered by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and then that special use permit is required to be renewed by the zoning administrator every 3 years. So it's a highly restrictive housing form currently in the city and offers a lot of uncertainty to both the owner of the property and also any tenants that may be renting an accessory dwelling currently. The second motivation is that there's legislative direction to explore an update. This came both from our city council in their calendar year 24-25 priorities item, as well as a state bill that was introduced in the Virginia Senate, Bill 304, that proposes making accessory dwellings by right accessory uses in residential districts. And then lastly, sort of similar to number one, is that the city's current regulations are out of date compared to our neighbors. Several of our nearby and neighboring jurisdictions have updated their accessory dwelling regulations within the last 10 years, so thereby, in comparison, making ours out of date. So moving into update considerations, and this is really, the next several slides are sort of, Mr. Stoddard touched on this earlier, but I think where the focus of the conversation could be tonight. Again, these are a list of considerations that staff has identified that could be considered as part of the update. It's not an exhaustive list and certainly is one that'll grow, but ones that we'll touch on tonight are location and zoning district that accessory dwellings can be built in, some design considerations including setbacks, height, size, and lot coverage, and then occupancy and short-term rental allowances like Airbnb or Vrbo, and then lastly, parking. And next, I'll talk a little bit more about what each current regulation is in the city, starting with location. So where are accessory dwellings currently permitted in the city? They're currently allowed in 3 residential districts. That's the R1A, R1B, and RM districts. These 3 districts comprise 790 acres of the city's land area, which altogether makes up about 73% of the total area. This map here, shows geographically in the city where each zoning district lies, with R1A comprising most of it is the lighter kind of yellow shade, R1B medium density residential, taking up the second most land area with this kind of darker yellow kind of in 3 different quadrants of the city, and then RM multifamily. So design setbacks is the first consideration, the first design consideration. For each of these slides, and I won't go through kind of each one in detail, but we've listed what the current regulations are in the city compared to what some of our neighbors are. Again, I'm just going to highlight what the current regulations are in the city, and then during the discussion, I'm happy to go back to any individual slide for more investigation. But for setbacks, again, detached accessory dwellings aren't currently permitted in the city, so there's no accessory dwelling specific setback. Because they're only allowed within the primary dwelling, the setbacks by default are whatever those are for the primary dwelling. We've included what the setbacks are for accessory buildings, like your shed, and those are 30 feet in the front yard and 3 feet in the side and rear yards. Second design consideration we've included is height. Similar to design the setback considerations for accessory dwellings. There is no accessory dwelling specific height requirement, and so whatever it is for the primary dwelling, so goes the accessory dwelling. For square footage, the current regulation is that an accessory dwelling can't be greater than 1/2 the floor area of the principal dwelling. What our neighbors have done are kind of different ways of thinking about regulating for size for accessory dwellings. For instance, Arlington regulates accessory dwellings by both the building footprint and the total gross floor area, whereas Alexandria focuses more on just the footprint. And then Fairfax has, it kind of depending on the interior or detached, just kind of flat numbers. For instance, 800 square feet or 40% of the principal dwelling, or just a flat 1,200 square foot cap for detached units. For lot coverage considerations, we've included what those, it's kind of broken up into 3 different mini kind of considerations, including building coverage, impervious surface coverage, and tree canopy coverage. What our neighbors have commonly done is default to whatever the underlying zoning is what the accessory dwelling has to abide by. So there's no additional regulations there, or there can be some exceptions in certain cases, but for the most part, whatever the maximum building coverage or impervious surface or tree canopy minimums are for a single-family home, those don't change if a detached accessory dwelling kind of enters that consideration. So continuing on lot coverage, right? We've included a kind of 2 different ways to kind of compare some existing conditions for building coverage, specifically in the R1A and R1B district, including what the minimum lot sizes are. So for R1A, that's your low-density residential district. The minimum lot size is just over 11,000 square feet. For R1B, medium density, it's a little smaller at 7,500 square feet. What we observed through the GIS data available is that the existing average lot size is just under 12,000 square feet. And then for building coverage, what we observed is that the existing average across both of these districts is 16%, whereas again, the maximum building coverage for both these districts is 25%. And then the bottom row here, we calculated approximately what the available average square footage is below that 25% building coverage for R1A lots. It's just under 1,500 square feet, And for R1B lots, it's just over 800 square feet. And in the map to the right, we've kind of broken it down by neighborhood to show, where the most available square footage is, again, on average per lot, under that 25% maximum. And if you compare this to the zoning district map a couple slides earlier, it makes sense that the most available square footage is in those low-density R1A districts, where you tend to have less available square footage in the R1B lots, where the minimum lot size is smaller. Regarding short-term rental, the state defines a short-term rental as a room or space that's suitable and intended for occupancy, meaning dwelling, sleeping, and lodging. For lease considerations of 30 consecutive days or less. The city doesn't currently regulate short-term rental and doesn't have, again, any accessory dwelling specific language around short-term rentals. Our neighbors have kind of varying degrees of regulation, whereas Arlington requires short-term rentals without limit, but does require the unit to be registered for short-term rental. Alexandria tracks the days that an accessory dwelling can be used for short-term rental, and Fairfax does not allow their accessory dwellings to be used for short-term rental uses. And then parking, the current regulation is one off-street parking space for the accessory dwelling. That's on top of the parking requirements required for the primary dwelling. So then I'll wrap up here again with the public engagement schedule. Mr. Stoddard touched on it at the top of the presentation, but again, we're in the kind of early stages of the consideration, where we're getting initial feedback from boards and commissions and the public. Again, we held 2 open house meetings with the same information, the same presentation, one on Tuesday, July 23rd, and another on Sunday, July 28th, where just about 100 people attended across both meetings. So we were pretty happy with the turnout there. Moving into September, we'll come back to the Planning Commission and the City Council for review, again, of that kind of draft recommendation or kind of framework, might be a better term than term sheet. And then coming out of October, where we'll kind of huddle and synthesize the feedback that we get from the second round of engagement happening in September. We'll come back to public bodies for review of the draft code that comes out of the feedback on that initial recommendation, and then moving into formal consideration, which is right now carrying through December into February, where final consideration from council is currently slated for February. And I'll leave it there and turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive. Obviously done a ton of work on this. Very important issue, and I'm really glad that we're discussing it now. And as you mentioned, I'm glad you walked through the schedule, obviously very early in the process here. I think you've laid out a very methodical and very careful outreach schedule, so thank you for that. Before we jump in, or before my comments, I guess, let me start with any other commissioners and see if anybody else wants to lead off with questions, comments, concerns, remarks.
I can go.
All right, Ms. Coleman.
How would you recommend the best way to approach this? Just go through if you could go back to that slide, maybe with Jack, with the different areas that you wanted us to give you feedback on. These 4. I feel like there are more, but areas than this. I know I had some on my list that weren't in the report that I would like to discuss. Do we want to discuss each of these in turn, or like I weigh in on everything and then somebody else goes? Like, what's the best way to do this?
I don't know if folks have remarks on everything, so I would just lead off with
What I-
general comments. and
Well,
then
okay.
Which one of these?
So my general comments are, like when I think about like my values in this endeavor, it's, flexibility, homeowners being able to maximize the use of their property to meet their needs. It's accessibility and equity. I think accessory dwellings should be achievable for as many people as possible. And everybody should be playing by the same rules. So we shouldn't be creating requirements that make it so people with really big houses can have accessory dwellings, but people with smaller houses, it's just not even an option, right? So those are like some of the things that I'm thinking about. On location zoning district, I mean, with those sort of big picture values in mind, I mean, my inclination would be for it to be R1A and R1B, maybe even RM if townhomes if there's a minimum lot size, where you have enough land where it's reasonable to put a probably very small AD on your property. Design, setbacks, I don't know, it's hard to just come up with a number because so much is dependent on the height of the building. I like the setback requirements that sort of change with the height of the building. So, if you have a lower, I'm talking about a detached, obviously, AD, like if you have a lower AD, it can be closer to the property line. And as it gets taller, it needs to be a little further away. So, but I don't think, I would not support requirements for, these to be like 10, 20, 30 feet away from the property line. I don't think that the requirements for the principal dwelling should apply to the AD. So something more closer to a shed-like setback seems appropriate to me with, perhaps regulations for window placements to maintain the privacy of nearby homes. That's my general feeling on setbacks. On height, I think it should be less than the primary dwelling. Maybe we can have a max height of, I don't know. I don't like throwing out numbers, but 20 feet, something like that. But again, I think it kind of depends on the context. And I do think that the AD should feel like subsidiary to the main building. Some of the ones that I've seen in Arlington, the AD is almost, it's not bigger than the main building, but they're pretty sizable. And it doesn't feel like an accessory use. And I feel like our goal here should be for it to feel like an accessory use and not like a second building, primary dwelling on the same property. I know that's vague, but again, I don't know that like specific numbers are helpful. Same kind of concept for the gross floor area and footprint maximums. I think these should be decided kind of relative to the primary structure. I'd also think that we should consider whether there should be a minimum size for ADs. I don't know that we want people building like micro ADs, but maybe I don't know, maybe if that meets their needs for the flexibility that they need, maybe that's what we should do. But something to consider. I would keep the impervious surface maximums and building coverage maximums the same as they are now, and the tree canopy coverage the same. Parking would not require any additional parking for ADs. Ownership requirements, I would not require owner occupancy. I think there have been studies that showed that more than 2/3 of ADs are owner occupied even without a mandate. And I don't think it's necessary for people to, I think people need to have the flexibility to be able to use these as they need to or desire to. let's see, short-term rental. I would say we need this policy like citywide. We can't just write it for ADs. It needs to be for the whole city. I would allow short-term rentals. I think it could be good to consider whether we want to cap the number of days. We could also consider, and this is something that I think is not touched on in the staff report, but there are impact fees for development. I don't know if you all have considered how that fee structure would look like for these, and maybe there's a way that we could use the fee structure to incentivize the creation of ADs that are either more affordable, kept more affordable, or not registered as short-term rentals or something like that. But I think fee structure is another thing that I would add to the list of things to discuss. Let's see. Did I get through your list? I think I did, because we talked about parking. I think one other question that came up is whether pre-existing non-conforming accessory dwelling units, how we deal with those. I would make every effort we can to, grandfather those, make sure that they are up to code, and license them as ADs, and give property owners the appropriate amount of flexibility to make sure that happens. And I think that is it. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was like design review. I know some communities require, certain design requirements, and I, again, would prefer to have the homeowner be able to decide that themselves. And, one other question. In some communities, there's a question about how many detached accessory dwellings you can build. My preference would be for that number to be 1 in the community, at least to start, 1 detached and maybe 1 attached. I think there are communities where some developers will buy a property and then build multiple ADs. So it's just something to consider. I think that's it for me.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments, Mr. Howard?
It's interesting, we don't have that many people here tonight. Maybe there are people listening or will listen. But when I think about municipal politics and conflicts, I think about parking. We just discussed that one. I think about bike lanes. We discussed that one. And now we've got affordable housing. Maybe affordable housing. So we've got it all tonight. And I would start by saying the staff and Jack, you did a great job with your presentation. I thought really, really thorough. But I would caution us a little bit, because I think we're being overly optimistic, or we're sort of hiding the fact that this is going to be extremely controversial, just like the T-zones were. And I think, Paul, this is why you have that long sort of list of being methodical with all the meetings and how long this will take, because we want to make sure that everybody hears this and gets their input in, because we know it's going to be controversial. So I would just make one comment in the beginning of your presentation, Jack. You have like, why are we doing this? What are the merits? You should follow that up with, what's controversial about this? What might be the unintended consequences? Or what do we foresee happening if we do this that some people won't like? Because I think by doing that, you are actually minimizing the conflict that will come up by kind of going over and saying, this is going to be positive, this is going to be positive, this is going to be positive. People know that we already had one person present today some information saying maybe we shouldn't do this. And there are going to be more people coming to the forefront saying that for various reasons. So let's counter that with our presentation that we make to the public. Just, I'm thinking about more units, maybe more kids, more people in our public schools, more people driving. We are, and just with the idea of short-term rental, transition, changeover, instability. Our neighborhoods have a housing stock where people have lived 20 to 30 years in them. And then they change over to another family who lives 20 to 30 years. If we do this and have short-term rentals, we're going to have a transition. We're going to have neighborhoods that are completely different socially than the neighborhoods we have now. We know this might happen, so we should talk about that. We should be doing some research on what has happened in other areas that have short-term rentals. We also should be considering the tax implications. Commissioner Colmont mentioned that, like impact fees. Also, how are we going to tax these accessory dwelling units? What are we foreseeing doing with the additional tax dollars that we bring in? Also, I kind of get the feeling some people in our town are selling the ADUs like it's affordable housing, just like we did with the T-zones. What happened with the T-zones? We're developing $1.5 million, 1,600 square foot townhomes. That's not affordable housing. I don't think this policy, in knowing our property values, our land values, knowing how developers think, developers that are going to coach and mentor individual homeowners who want to do this stuff, it's not going to be affordable for most people. So, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to take some impact fees and put it into affordable housing so that we can preserve the fields and affordable housing in other areas of our town? Because this isn't going to do it. This is likely going to build $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 accessory dwelling units. And I know some people might say, Derek, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? Well, we talked about the T-zones and the townhomes, and we talked about $800,000 townhomes. We're not getting any $800,000 townhomes, I don't think. So when I say these numbers like a $600,000 ADU, we might just get that. So that's not affordable housing. So let's really think about that. And let's think about beyond the design, the setback, the height, the size, all these technical things. That's fine. We should talk about that. But let's take a step back and think about what do those technical things mean socially? What does it mean for our town and areas that have been very stable, but also very exclusive for a long time? If we want to make them more inclusive, what are the consequences to doing that? There absolutely are consequences, and they might be consequences that we're willing to stomach, but we should definitely talk about them. And I didn't hear any of that tonight. And it gets me a little bit upset, being an urban planner, to see these technical things like zoning, design, setback, height. Look, what? There's so much more. And we're only being asked to comment on the technical things, but those technical things have social ramifications. And again, not part of our discussion. Why not? Planning is not just technical. It is technical leading to consequences, and those consequences are social in nature. So let's talk about them. We might bring in more tax revenue. We might help some families bear the cost of increasing property values by renting stuff out. We might be able to have families take in other family members, whether it's their kids or their elderly parents. I mean, these are all good things, but there are consequences to this. And we really need to think, just like with the T-zones, we tried to think very strategically on how to structure that to get what we wanted. We failed. I believe we failed. because now we've opened up the market and the market is doing what it's doing, and we're like, oh man, there's nothing we can do about that. So with this, we have to be very careful with what we plan for. Short-term rental allowances will lead to greater instability. Do we really want that? Aren't people rich enough in our town? Do they really need more money? I mean, maybe they do, but I would be careful about that, because I would rather put a ban on short-term rentals to bring greater neighborhood stability. I think we want people to take in their families and provide for their families, but to allow our community become an Airbnb community, I mean, we really need to be careful about that. Go start reading all the Airbnb tourist areas and what is happening to the property values, what's happening to the neighborhoods, the amount of protest that is going on in those places. We got to read that stuff and take it seriously, and then think about what we are about to do here. I do think we need to make our single-family zoning areas more inclusive. I actually am in favor of ADUs, but doing it in a very methodical way, a very careful way, and not just saying, ADUs, that's a good thing, that'll reduce racial inequities and class inequities, and we should just do that because that's what other cities are doing. And then, you're kind of showing what the other cities, but that's not enough. We need to think much more deeply about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what could be the potential consequences. So, again, I want to end by applauding all the work that is being done, to say that I do fully support this policy, but I want us to be very cautious and very careful and not just move with where the political wind is going, because the political wind is going in this direction. But let's be smarter, let's be more cautious, and let's open up our community to more people in a way that's inclusive, but also respectful and thoughtful, so that we don't do something we regret. And I want to say that I regret the way the T-zones went down. I know there are different opinions. Commissioner Duncan said he thought what we did with the T-zones was exactly what he wanted, and in terms of what we're getting. But that's not what I wanted. I want growth, development, and equity. There's no equity in there. We could design this so that we don't have greater instability, we do economic development, and we have equity. But we have to be very thoughtful about that. And I'll say, I've been on this planning commission for almost going on 4 years, and we've done very little on the equity side. We've done a lot on the pro-growth side, but we always fall short on the equity side. Let's not fall short on equity inclusion if we do ADUs. Thank you.
Before we go to Mr. Stevens, I think we need a motion to extend the meeting. Would anybody like to do that?
I can do it. I move we extend to, shall we say, 11:15? I think that's where staff has us adjourning on the agenda, just so we don't
Yeah.
have to do this again.
Second.
Thank you.
Move the second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, Mr. Stevens, over to you.
All right, happy to jump in here. I start out with some overall comments, and then I'll try to answer as many of the specific physical dimension questions as I can get through. I join with those who view accessory dwellings as giving homeowners a means of addressing a whole range of issues, from housing needs for their family members, possible income opportunities, and a whole range of needs that, quite frankly, are beyond the ability of people in government to forecast. Indeed, I think that the best argument in favor of relaxing our rules, especially for detached accessory dwellings, is to let families use their properties to fulfill their needs. So our current rules are clearly restrictive to the point that they pretty much just don't allow them. And I think that makes the city look a little regressive when you, in light of what a lot of other communities have already done throughout the country. We're definitely behind on this, I think, as Mr. Trainer's comments indicated. I think we don't have to view this as a result as an experiment, but rather something that has been proven in other jurisdictions, so we can be the beneficiary of the experience in other jurisdictions and not feel like we have to go out on a cliff for something that's new. Accessory dwellings, I think, well, I agree with Commissioner Hyra. I think they will have very limited, if any, effect on affordability. However, people who oppose them because they want it to be affordable housing, I think are kind of missing the point, at least as I view these, as just giving families a chance to use their property in a way that's useful for their needs. So that's kind of the overview. As far as the specifics, I'll try to run through these, although I may have to just follow it up with a memo to kind of get into enough depth on these because they are kind of complicated issues. First of all, annual cap on permit issuance. I'm not sure that we really need to do that, mainly because I just don't think very many of these are going to get built. The starting price is at least $200,000 and probably higher than that with current construction costs. But if we want to put one in to make people feel more comfortable in the early stages, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Setbacks, I think 5 feet for one story makes sense. I get a little nervous about higher units, 2 stories. Perhaps we could consider some type of a sliding scale so that if you're going to go up to 2 stories, you need at least 10 feet for a setback. I don't know what the precise number is, but that's the concept. Likewise, on height, I don't have a specific number. It seems to me that 25 feet that Arlington has is getting up there pretty high, especially if it's close to somebody's, your neighbor's property and it happens to be close to where their house is located. I could see that being giving you a sense of imposition. As far as impervious surface limits, I'd keep those within the existing limits, the 35%. Likewise, on lot coverage, I would keep that within the 25%. I think that's a good way to kind of alleviate some concerns about just how far people will go with the accessory dwellings. Tree canopy, I'll be interested to see what the Urban Forestry Commission is saying. What I'd like to see, if any trees are removed to build an accessory dwelling, that there be a requirement to replace those trees. Obviously, it'd be samplings, but at least a 1-for-1 replacement. Stormwater, this one is kind of a tough one to know. I know that that there are going to be building requirements, but I think the goal ought to be no negative impact on neighbors. And so I don't know, but it could be that we need some additional consideration on stormwater to make sure that we achieve that goal of no impact on neighbors. Parking, I really don't think we need a mandate or a minimum for parking. So far, I just don't see it being that big of an issue. Gross floor area and footprint maximums. Not sure that they're needed, but otherwise I think we could follow what Arlington has done. Maybe just to indicate that 1,000 square foot is an upper limit is sufficient. Ownership requirements, I don't see it as being something desirable to allow kind of separating off the AD and allow that to have separate ownership. I think it should stay along with the primary parcel as an integrated effort. Rental policy, I tend to agree that short-term rental is a problem. I saw this firsthand in Savannah, where it really does undermine the quality of the neighborhood. In the HOA where I live, we have a 6-month minimum for rental, and it seems to me that works pretty well as far as integrating people who rent with those who own. It's basically indistinguishable here, and I think that ought to be the goal. So I would be opposed to a short-term rental capability at this point. Not quite sure on pre-existing non-conforming ADs, what to do with those. I think I'd go along with staff's recommendation on what they think is appropriate for those. And I think that's most of it. As I say, I may need to follow up with something in writing to get into a little bit more detail, because there's, a lot of these separate items here, and they do get a little complicated. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. I think there are a lot of details we're going to get into, and staff is clearly going to look to us for those at some point. So thank you for weighing in on those. Mr. Duncan, anything on your end?
I think most of what I would have to offer has been covered already, and I'm not sure quite where I land on the short-term rentals and the parking issues, so I'm interested to hear more input from the community and other commissioners and council members on those 2 points in particular, which do seem to have the most potential to, create a different environment in some of our neighborhoods than maybe the folks bought into when they bought their homes. I mean, I think property rights and the ability to use your property is very important, certainly very important in Virginia. At the same time, we have to be respectful of or considerate of folks who, bought into Falls Church with something in mind, and any significant departure from that something is naturally going to cause some political turmoil and an opportunity for dialogue. But I do think that in listening to the public input at both the Tuesday and the Sunday sessions, by the way, nice job by Paul on Tuesday as the moderator, and to Jack on Sunday as the moderator, I was interested to hear the variety of, desires that people have for the thing that we're calling an accessory unit, whatever it turns out to be. And that's sort of where my thinking lands right now. I mean, over the 40-year course of time that we've lived in our house on Southwest Street, I could see an accessory unit being used in several different ways in the life of my time here and in the life of the house, which is 70 years old, the main house. When we first moved here as a kidless couple in our 20s, if there had been an accessory unit, we probably would have used it to put up our parents when they came to visit instead of spending money at the hotels that we had to put them in because our house wasn't big enough and only had 2 bedrooms and 1 bath as we bought it. As years passed on, there might have been some phase when we had kids that we would have, if we'd chosen to raise our kids in a home setting rather than an institutional daycare setting, might have been an opportunity for a au pair or a child care person to live, separate but still connected to us. When the kids got older, maybe we would like to have had it as a short-term rental or a rental of 6 months or a year in order to stock up some money for their college tuition. You get my point here. When you get older, it's a good place for your parents to park rather than have to go to some sort of institutional assisted living setting. And then finally, at the end stage, it's a place where I or my wife move and give the main house to the now grown children and maybe their family. So whatever we do, I'd like to see us maintain as much flexibility to accommodate the changing needs of homeowners didn't even mention like a special needs child who, is reasonably independent but still would benefit from living in proximity to parents. I'd like to see us try to accommodate as much of that flexibility as possible. I am mildly optimistic that, and this goes to Gene's numbers that he presented at the early part of the meeting, mildly optimistic that, if I built a unit like this for a couple $100,000, which builds you a pretty decent accessory unit, I think, certainly $300,000 would, that I could rent it out to, an adult child or someone for a price that would come in under what, your standard 2-bedroom rental apartment in Falls Church is going for now, which is $3,000-4,000. I wouldn't have the same, I'd be able to price below that, and so that would create a housing opportunity that would maybe be available to 20-somethings, which is a demographic that I think we're a little thin on here. We got plenty of kids up to 18, and then by the time you turn 30, if you're lucky, you've got a job that enables you to swing a $3,000 or $3,500 a month apartment. But for people in their 20s, young professionals working, we don't really have too much to offer. So I would, see that as a potential opportunity to provide somewhat more affordable housing to a segment of the population we don't really have too much of here now, would benefit from having more of, I think. As for the, setbacks and heights and all that, I have my own opinions. I talked to a woman who was at the Sunday meeting who was, pretty, I think it would be fair to say, adamantly opposed to the fact that we're even talking about this. And, she felt very strongly that she didn't want such an accessory unit looming over her backyard. And so she wanted to either not have anything at all or to push it up towards the main house. And yet, she said that the house right next door to hers, was occupied by an elderly couple, and when they are done with the house, it'll get sold and it'll probably be torn down. And that, at the end of the day, is what motivates me to continue to want to talk about this, taking into consideration that, there are consequences of some of the changes that are being talked about, and I do think it would be helpful to include that in your presentation. But the opportunity to, do something that would preserve modest-sized houses like the one that we bought 40 years ago, which, even though we've expanded it internally, is still basically, the footprint that it was when we bought it, is an opportunity we should try to avail ourselves of in some ways, and this could be one of those ways, because otherwise houses like mine are simply going to get torn down and replaced by $3 million McMansions. It's just the way it is, unless we provide some sort of pressure valve that enables houses like mine to be used with an accessory unit in a way that appeals to a certain part of the market that will trade off, a big grand home for, the opportunity to have the uses that I described earlier. So I would like us to continue to talk about this, and I appreciate the efforts to be pretty methodical about, getting community input and asking for people to put stickers. I was interested that people seem less concerned about height. The 25-foot height thing didn't seem to disturb people as much as I thought it would. And generally, it seemed like people wanted to push them back into the corner of the lot rather than keep them close to the main house. I'd like to hear more community input on that. But, all the houses around me, on 3 sides at least, have been, two sides, I guess, have been, torn down and built up into large, looming, beautiful homes, but, homes that loom over my backyard in a way that I never could have imagined when we bought our house in 1985. And, we've let that happen. And life has gone on, you know. I've adjusted to the fact that my backyard isn't, you know, a forest like it used to be because the neighbors cut the trees down to build a bigger house. And my house has gained in value thanks to the value of their homes. So, you know, it's okay because we allowed some, you know, ability to do those sorts of tear downs. And I'd like to see us try to keep discussing the opportunity to do these accessory units. I do think in closing that internal accessory units should be put on some kind of fast track. It seems to me like the bigger question may take a little longer to litigate, but internal accessory units, we're too restrictive. We're overly, you know, expending effort to prevent those. And I think, although they do raise questions about parking and load on utilities, which is maybe where impact fees come in, I do think we should do whatever we can to encourage internal basement or over existing garage, you know, over existing footprints of buildings that are on the site now to be accessory units that would rent at, you know, prices that would be below almost any new apartment that has been built here in the last 12 or 15 years. I think that would be a positive. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Good comments, as always, from my fellow commissioners. For me, as I said, I'm glad we are talking about this. You know, kind of proud that we're talking about this. I think it's really exciting for the city to be, you know, at least considering this. It does mean some change, but as Mr. Duncan eloquently said, I mean, change is happening anyway. So, you know, if this will somehow be able to save smaller houses from being knocked down and yards from being clear cut, you know, here and there, you know, I'm all in favor of that. I don't know if this is going to work, as Mr. Hire said, you know, but I know that if we don't do it, then, you know, we're going to get more of the same. And I know there's a lot of frustration with more of the same. So with that as a preamble, I do think this is beyond just the pipeline of units that we have coming down the pipe. For all the reasons was mentioned earlier, additional income, aging in place, all that stuff matters. Falls Church, again, here it does appear to be an outlier. We don't really have a good policy in place now, as we all know. It's not really being used. So, you know, I do support the expansion of this idea into the R1A, R1B, RM. I don't quite know in my head how that would actually work, but you know, the creativity of developers and other experts would be interesting to see what they can get done. I've seen some so small units. Those super small ones be really innovative and interesting and unique in some places. So whether it's going to work, I don't know. But if we don't allow it to happen, it's certainly not going to do it at all. So in terms of more of the technical things, in terms of the height, I forget which jurisdiction it was, but one that talked about you know, no higher than the existing dwelling or 20 feet, whichever is less. I think that was Alexandria. That seems to make sense to me. In terms of square feet, I think this is highly dependent on the size of the lot. It was hard to parse through the different materials and figure out what number makes sense, but some kind of scale based on, you know, on the available lot that's there now. Whether or not you can put multiple units, I think, is another question. I hadn't really thought about that one. You know, for other things like impervious surfaces, lot coverage, the underlying zoning does make sense to me. That's already in place. It's already been, you know, it's what people are used to. Short-term rental was something I hadn't thought about before. I was all in favor. So, hey, this would be a really neat idea. I started talking to a couple of neighbors, and yeah, the opposition to this was pretty strong. So I actually, I need to think more about this. But I think creating a policy for the city based around the ADUs may be tough. So a short-term rental policy based on the ADU conversation. So I don't really know how that plays out, but I think that's something we should look at very, very, very carefully. And I really like this idea of the fee structure and trying to figure out what we can do with revenue that's generated from this and put that into some kind of affordable housing fund. That makes a ton of sense to me. We've Mr. Heyer in particular, has talked about different ways to do that, the frustration with not getting anything done. This is here in front of us. We're early in the process. I'd like to see us at least explore that, what the yield could possibly be, would it make a difference? But that's a really innovative idea as far as I'm concerned. A lot of other things have been covered, so let me see, anybody else have any other questions or comments here at this late hour? Anything from staff that we should still cover? Oh, Mr. Stevens, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I just wanted to draw attention to our speaker series that we had on June the 2nd, 2021. It was all about accessory dwellings, so I would refer people to that as a good source, additional source of information, both the presentation as well as the discussion by the commissioners afterwards.
Good idea. Yes, there is tons of information about this. I'm sure as my other fellow commissioners have done preparing for this meeting, there's lots of materials out there, but the devil's in the details, right? How it's applied here is really what's going to matter. Again, which is why I'm glad that we're digging into this conversation as we are. So anything else from staff? Anything we should cover? Anything that we've missed that you need us to weigh in on tonight?
No,
I know we're going to have more bites at the apple, but.
Yeah, appreciate all the feedback, all really great comments. Thank you.
All right, then we'll move on from that work session item, thanks very much, into our information items. Any planning commissioner reports? All right, going once? Tim, nothing? Okay, good. All right, let's go to the director's report then, Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. I don't have a written report tonight other than the look ahead of the agenda. Generally, the scheduling rule is we try to keep agendas to no more than three substantive items. The September 4th meeting is stacking up. So I do want to run through what's on that agenda right now. Coming back to you, I had mentioned this last time, the Founders Road 2, they had committed through their voluntary concessions that they would provide public art. They had previously briefed you on this. It's the seagrass with the moving wires and cables inside, which I think is a great idea for the city. It adds a lot of interest. That will be reviewed as a site plan amendment is the formal mechanism for accepting that. So that'll be back to you for action. It is the same materials as were presented previously. The Lee Park site plan application under the revised T-zone code is coming back to you. You had a work session on that recently. They've resubmitted and they're responding positively to direction from the commission as well as staff. We have to complete our review, which is why we still have it flagged as tentative, but so far things are looking promising for holding that schedule. Commercial parking, because of the advertising needs, moving that to September 4th. Bike plan to keep that on schedule with council. We're looking at final action on that as well. And then your work session with accessory dwellings coming back to you on the framework. I think the easiest one maybe to move might be that last bullet point, but I want to run that schedule change against the project.
So you think the easiest?
The accessory dwellings, because it's the furthest from action.
Easiest one to move?
Yes,
Oh.
because it's the furthest away from action, and it's sort of city-driven. But before I actually say that, I need to run that by Jack and make sure it doesn't do something funny for the project schedule. You all are the planning commission, so you weigh in pretty heavily on the zoning ordinance, and so I don't want you to feel like you're always going last on these things as well. So, but I'll
We
take
have
a look
nothing
at
on
that.
the 18th yet. Is that correct then?
Correct. If we scroll down, you can mark your calendars. Parking Day is going to be on September 20th. We've got Kurt Lawrence is going to be our lead on this year's event. We're looking at a location we've used before along South Maple, next to the 455 Tinner Building. One of the reasons for selecting that location is we'll be able to highlight, of course, as we always do, environmental aims around the bike plan, the one-stop shop for community energy. We'll also be able to highlight the recently adopted Tinner Hill Historic District, and hopefully work with the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation to get some materials out. We can also celebrate the parklets that are under construction that are immediately adjacent. Affordable living policy, this is a penciled-in date. It's not firm. The Affordable Living Group has worked up their recommended goals, and I understand staff and consulting support is going to work on a draft policy, and then it'll come out I think at some point in the fall for comment, and so I wanted to put that out there so we didn't lose track of it. Accessory dwellings comes back in November. So that's probably far enough on the look ahead, unless there are any questions about those. And then just things that are not scheduled, but I want you to be aware of, because I never want you guys to be surprised. Development application specifically, so Maple and Annandale, that's still pending a resubmittal from the applicant. They've been working on that for several months, but they do reach out and confirm things about what are the development regulations, what's the schedule. So I think they are still working on it. Pearson Square SC, that can probably come off for the time being. That's that can probably come off for the time being. Quinn's site plan. So we met with the applicant team 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. So they're looking at moving from their special exception approval into the site plan process. They're looking at some minor changes, which is customary as things go from SC to site plan. In terms of the architecture, the layout of the site, it's right. Obviously, it's by the VCs. It has to be in conformance with what was approved previously by council, but it is common, like I said, to see modifications, and so they wanted to talk those through with staff, but they are expecting a submittal either August or September of their site plan. Iceni Jeweler, we're waiting for a resubmittal on them. And then these last two are new applications that have come in. 821 West Broad, this would be the Econized Closet, which is currently on Park Avenue, would relocate to a new building, so they would purchase the lot at the corner of Broad and Spring. And then they would tear down the existing structure, and then they'd build a new all-commercial building. So that's before us as a by right site plan application as an all-commercial building. And that's it was missing some application materials, and we've let them know that, and we're expecting them to resubmit a complete application shortly. And then 258 North Washington, this would come in under the revised T-zone code. This is an existing historic structure. It was one that was talked about while we were looking at the T-zone updates. And what they're proposing is to keep the existing historic structure and then to build a new structure alongside of it. And so this would actually put it in a very different footing from the other T-zone applications that they're sort of working the sort of creativity of working around the existing structure, and they would shore that up, make it safe, preserve it, and then repurpose it as residential homes. And then the new building would also be used for residential condos. Because they're condos versus townhouses, they're currently thinking of a smaller square footage. And as they're currently thinking, they've actually moved into the density range where they would have committed affordable dwelling units included in the project. It's early in the process, and I think that would be a real plus to see a project like that come through, one that does make full use of that density allowance and the accessory dwellings, or the affordable dwellings. And so we'll see how that moves through the process. Because it involves a historic structure, they've started by talking to the HARB, but obviously we let them know, and we want the community to know as well, that the HARB is not fully approving the project. It also has to obviously come before you all as a site plan application. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Exciting stuff coming ahead. One thing that's not on the list that somebody called to my attention, the status of the work on streetscape from the Flower Building past St. James, the church, the convent, up to Founders Row.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that in terms of a timetable and status?
So it's the West Broad multimodal project. It's within the capital improvement program. And I think they have moved into property acquisition. And so that there are a number of property owners that I think it's more than 30 property owners that have to be contacted. The overall project is trying to deliver on that vision in the West Broad small area plan that had flagged that West Broad is a real divider for people trying to walk the city. And so the emphasis was on more connections, ADA compliance, both across the street as well as along the street. And so it does end up touching a lot of properties. They're in property acquisition now. But I will follow up and get an answer on that schedule.
Okay, so that would be the 900, among that would be the 900 block from the coin shop up to Five Guys, that side of the street, plus, as I mentioned earlier, the St. James.
Yeah, it actually goes all the way up to Virginia Avenue. So it would, the focus originally was on the crossing, so it adds signalized crossing across from what is now the Solace Brewery and the Godfrey's Tavern Bakery. So there'd be a new hawk signal going in there as part of the project. The intersection at the Kensington at Lee would be fixed up. The crosswalks would be straightened and pedestrian signals would be added. Where we have deficient ADA ramps, that would be repaired as well. And then, yeah, sort of along the street, there's a general repair of all the driveway entrances as well as a 1 to 2 foot widening of the sidewalk.
Does that include the blockage at Betos?
That has been broken out as a separate project and is proceeding ahead of this project.
What's the just general time frame for the larger project that you discussed?
So a lot of these city projects, and this is something that obviously our engineers are aware of, and they're making more people aware of it, is that working outside the city right away is very difficult because it does require property acquisition, and generally eminent domain is not a popular topic, and for very understandable reasons. And so the city historically has been very hesitant to use that, and so it's been very difficult, I think, to bring some of these projects through.
The Broad and Spring, I didn't quite catch so Econo Closet's going to move to a new building at the corner of Broad and Spring. And then what happens to the current building that they're in on Park?
So I think they're exploring options for what they might do with their property. I think a lot of this has been brought about because now there's more flexibility with what they could do with a T-zone property. And they've wanted, I think, bigger office space, new office space, and this might give them a way to do it, that options that are available in the T-zones might allow them to finance an all-commercial building somewhere else.
Okay. All right, but the Broad and the office, the use that they're talking about building in the shorter run would be at Broad and Spring.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any correspondence?
A couple items. I don't know if, Mr. Stoddard, you want to talk through these?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's pull up the first one. This is, and typically I have included this. Wow. That's a font choice there. This is the quarterly CIP report that Caitlin Sobsey presented to council recently, and I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of this as well. And this is a rundown of the active CIP projects and how they're doing against their schedule as well as their funding status. So I'll leave this in here for your all's reading. And then, actually, one thing we should probably remember to add to the look ahead is the CIP kickoff, which you all typically do in the fall. And that might be an opportunity to engage on any questions about that. This is so this was provided as a public comment from the Falls Church Climate Action Network, and Kurt Lawrence, who is our environmental planner, as well as our staff liaison to the ESC, and is really spearheading the delivery of the Community Energy Action Plan, had provided a report to the ESC recently about progress achieved against those goals. And then this was sort of another look at progress, and this was a comment that the Action Network wanted submitted to Council and the Planning Commission, and so it's included in your packets.
Terrific. Okay. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I think the idea of the FCCAN submission is to move towards making something like the CIP quarterly report, so that information about the status of progress towards the climate action plan, rather than waiting every 3 or 5 years before that's done, which is kind of what has been done historically, that we take the same approach that has been taken towards the CIP, which is to come up with maybe either a quarterly or perhaps semi-annually report that someone could kind of quickly look at and just see where we're at as far as the various actions that are included in the climate action plan. So you're putting it in next to the CIP, I would think was very appropriate, and hopefully there can be some connection between those two.
All right. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Pardon me? Right, this is our last meeting for the month. We are taking the rest of August off, and our next meeting will be in early September.
Correct. You're all on recess, so I expect to see everyone at the playground, and then we'll see you in September.
Excellent. Thank you all for a very productive meeting tonight. Thanks for staying late. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for doing this on your day off. We're adjourned.